Welcome back to Secrets in Slumber. Tonight, we drift beyond the edges of what it means to be human. Every species protects its future, but what if ours isn't entirely ours anymore? Breathe softly now. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the pulse in your chest slow until it matches the rhythm beneath this voice. A calm, endless heartbeat, echoing through space. Out there in the dark between worlds, life multiplies in patterns we do not yet understand. Stars bloom like cells dividing. Galaxies spiral like strands of DNA, unfolding across time. In every direction, the universe hums with a quiet purpose, the will to continue, to replicate, to evolve. Here on Earth, that same hum lives inside us, in our blood, in our bones, in the tiny double helix that whispers, "Remember where you came from." But tonight, we ask a question few dare to linger on. What if that whisper didn't begin here? What if the story of humanity, our breath, our birth, our dreams, has always been shared? Let your body relax. Each inhale pulls starlight in. Each exhale releases the noise of the day. We are floating now, weightless, somewhere between sleep and remembering. There are memories older than our species, fragments of contact, visits in the night, strange hands that shaped our form. Old myths call them gods, angels, watchers. Modern minds call them visitors, beings from beyond. But across centuries, the message never changed. They touched us, they changed us, and maybe they left something of themselves behind. Feel your breath moving slowly through the body, as if you are breathing not air, but time. The air you draw in was once the dust of stars, once the breath of creatures long vanished, once the sigh of comets brushing against atmospheres unseen. Everything that ever lived shares this same circulation, the quiet exchange of matter, memory, and meaning. Now imagine that same exchange happening not just between lives on Earth, but across worlds, across species, across dimensions. For decades, men and women have whispered the same story, from the still hours, between midnight and dawn. Stories of light that descends from the sky, of rooms bathed in silver, of procedures too precise for fear to fully take hold. And within those stories, a pattern forms. A purpose begins to reveal itself, the taking of life's code, the merging of one species with another, a silent program written in the language of biology. Perhaps it began as experiment, perhaps it is something older, a continuation of a cosmic lineage that has always linked the heavens to the human heart. Tonight, we drift into that lineage. We move gently through testimonies and theories, through the quiet corridors of memory, to explore what it means to share our blood with something beyond this earth. You are safe here. No fear, only curiosity wrapped in calm. Let the edges of your awareness blur like ink in water. We are simply observers, dreamers wandering the frontier of possibility. In this space, science and myth hold hands. Genes become stories, stories become stars. And the question that guides us hums softly, in every cell. Are we entirely human, or the continuation of something that began among the stars? Picture yourself lying under a vast night sky. Each star above is a heartbeat, each constellation a memory of creation. Between selling dureces, Wanison Beal, somewhere, light years away, another species might be staring back, not as strangers, but as distant relatives, watching the same darkness, wondering if the children of Earth will one day remember them. The air is cool, the pulse steady, and the night stretches forever. In that quiet, imagine a soft glow weaving through the dark, a spiral of living light, twisting like DNA, connecting you to everything that ever was, and everything that might yet be. Tonight's story will carry you there, into the gentle mystery of connection, into the whispers of hybrid bloodlines, into the places where science sleeps beside dream. So breathe, Let the thoughts settle like dust in still air. Every species protects its future, but what if ours isn't entirely ours anymore? Because somewhere, in the silence between worlds, the next generation may already be awake. They are listening, they are waiting, and perhaps they are already here. Chapter 1: The Reproductive Encounters. In the quiet of the early 1960s, long before the internet and endless cameras, the first stories began to surface. They were not shouted, not sensational. They came softly, confessions whispered in offices, in church basements, in the half-light between dream and disbelief. Each voice began the same way. Something happened to us, and we don't know what it was. The year was 1961. New Hampshire nights were long and still. Betty and Barney Hill were driving home from a short vacation in Canada, winding through the dark mountain roads when the lights appeared. At first, they thought it was a star, then an airplane, then something that seemed to be following them, moving with deliberate, intelligent grace. When they stopped their car and lifted binoculars, the light expanded, a structured craft, metallic and hovering in impossible silence. Barney saw figures through the windows, small human-shaped silhouettes staring back, and then, nothing. Time folded. 2 hours vanished. They arrived home with scuffed shoes, torn binocular straps, and a quiet unease that deepened with every passing night. Their dog refused to enter the bedroom. Their dreams began to tangle with something that felt like memory. Months later, under hypnosis, the story unfolded like an old reel of film playing underwater. The room of silver light, the narrow table, the beings who moved around them in silent coordination. A long, thin needle pressed gently into Betty's abdomen. She didn't scream. The pain was dulled, muffled by a voice in her mind that said, "It will not hurt." They asked questions about reproduction, about the human body, about love. They took samples, skin, hair, fluids, and promised, in words that weren't spoken aloud, that she would forget until the right time came. Barney's recollection was different, more fragmented, but it carried the same strange precision. A cup-like device placed over his groin, an extraction performed without touch, clinical, deliberate. He felt watched, measured, as though his very essence was being catalogued for reasons beyond comprehension. When the Hills account became public, the world treated it like a curiosity, a first modern myth of little gray beings and lost time. Yet beneath the headlines, something quieter was happening. Other voices began to echo theirs. 4 years earlier, in 1957, a young Brazilian farmer named Antonio Villas-Boas had told a story nearly identical in its strangeness. Working late one evening, he watched a red light descend over his fields. The craft that landed glowed like molten metal. Beings in tight suits led him inside, where the air shimmered with warmth and electricity. They examined him, took blood, and later, a woman with silver blonde hair appeared, her eyes large, her movements calm and deliberate. She drew him close, wordless, her intent clear. When the act was over, she pointed upward, to the sky, then to her own stomach, and then back to him, as if to say, "The child will not be born here." He awoke hours later, weak and dazed, lying in the field where it had begun. Doctors later found strange burns on his body, ultraviolet injuries with no earthly source. His story, dismissed as fantasy at first, would in time mirror the same clinical precision that appeared again and again in decades to come. Across continents, decades apart, the pattern already shimmered like a hidden thread. The extraction of life's essence, eggs, sperm, tissue, under gentle restraint and incomprehensible purpose. No violence, no chaos, just procedure, systematic, methodical, quiet as a heartbeat. In 1967, another name would whisper through the field of ufology, Betty Andreson, a devout Christian woman from Massachusetts. She described being taken through a wall of her own house while her family slept. She awoke in a luminous chamber surrounded by beings who radiated not malice, but mission. They moved with tender detachment, scientists in a symphony of purpose. Her body floated, weightless, while they examined her with instruments of light. When they were done, they showed her something that defied fear, a glowing embryo suspended in fluid, pulsing like a tiny star. "This is part of you," a voice told her, not through sound but through thought. She understood nothing, except that it mattered deeply. For decades, she would struggle to reconcile faith and experience. How could such beings, pale, enormous-eyed, emotionless, speak of creation with such serenity? Was it desecration or divine continuation? By the end of the 1960s, these stories had formed an invisible constellation, each separate but connected by unseen geometry, abductions unfolding with surgical regularity, witnesses remembering fragments of medical intent, and always, that same thread pulsed through it all: the obsession with reproduction, the harvest of human potential, the quiet promise that something or someone was being made. As the decade closed, the world's attention drifted elsewhere, to moon landings, to wars, to earthbound revolutions. But in the quiet, in the small hours when the world was asleep, more voices began to whisper. Their words trembled with awe, not terror. "They weren't trying to hurt me," many said. "They were trying to understand." Perhaps that was the beginning of it all, the moment when humanity became both subject and participant in a mystery of biology that spanned the stars, a story not of invasion, but of inheritance. And so it began, the reproductive encounters. By the mid-1970s, the stories had multiplied, not in tabloids or campfire tales, but in quiet living rooms and therapist offices, where voices trembled with memory. Different cities, different languages, the same rooms, the same light, the same procedures. Budd Hopkins, a painter by trade, never intended to become an investigator. He was drawn in through art, his brush tracing geometric patterns that later echoed the scars people described finding on their bodies. One evening, a friend confided an impossible secret: lost time, strange marks, and a memory of tall gray beings working over her, as if she were part of an experiment. Hopkins listened with the curiosity of an artist and the patience of a skeptic, but when the second, third, and 10th person told him nearly identical stories, something shifted. He began to document them, each testimony recorded with precision. A woman from Brooklyn recalling a bright light flooding her bedroom, paralyzing her as figures entered through the wall. A man from Arizona waking to find himself in a sterile chamber with a table of instruments that gleamed like liquid silver. A couple from Oregon, missing hours of memory, later describing in trance the same details: curved walls without seams, an examination table shaped to the human form, and beings whose eyes felt endless. The tone was always the same: clinical, detached, almost gentle. Never the chaos of nightmares, but a choreography. People described being laid flat under a luminous dome. They heard a hum, felt vibrations that moved through the body, and saw long silver devices glide through the air, as if guided by thought alone. Eggs removed, sperm collected, tissue taken, data gathered. Hopkins began noticing a rhythm within the testimonies, a structure that repeated like a code hidden inside dreams. He called it the pattern. It began with the light, an intrusion in the night sky, moving closer until it filled the room, then paralysis, soft, invisible restraint that calmed as much as it confined. Then the examination beings clustered around the subject, performing tasks with purpose but without cruelty. Finally the return, the witness placed gently back into familiar surroundings, the memory blurred by exhaustion. What frightened Hopkins most was not the content, but the consistency. People from different continents, unaware of one another, described the same procedures down to the smallest gesture: the way one being would place a hand near the subject's temple, the faint humming tone, the sterile blue-white light that seemed to come from nowhere. When he compared the accounts to earlier abduction stories, Betty and Barney Hill, Betty Andreasen, he saw the same pattern repeating across decades, a global phenomenon carried out with surgical precision. The question was no longer if it happened, but why. Some of the stories intersected with other legendary encounters. In 1975, Travis Walton, a young logger from Arizona, disappeared in front of 6 co-workers after a glowing craft descended into the forest. He reappeared 5 days later, confused, dehydrated, speaking of a blinding blue room and small beings moving with mechanical grace. He remembered one approaching with a curved instrument, placing it against his chest as his awareness dissolved into light. When he returned, his watch had stopped, his beard had grown, and his sense of time was fractured. He was calm, detached, as if part of him was still on that ship. Researchers comparing cases found more evidence of the same biological theme. Medical files showed strange incisions that healed overnight, pregnancies that appeared, then vanished, blood tests revealing anomalies doctors couldn't explain, enzyme levels out of human range, transient hormonal shifts suggestive of conception, and hypnosis sessions echoed with the same words from countless subjects. They were taking something from me. The deeper Hopkins looked, the less random it all seemed. He realized that each experiencer wasn't chosen by chance. Their families had histories of sightings, of unexplainable marks, of childhood dreams about glowing figures. It was generational, as if participation in the program passed quietly through bloodlines. When he mapped the connections, a web began to form, an invisible lineage stretching across continents, centuries, and DNA strands. By the end of the decade, the evidence had become overwhelming. So many voices describing identical encounters could not simply be coincidence or fantasy. Something intelligent was at work, studying, collecting, perhaps guiding. Hopkins wrote, "Whatever this is, it knows us intimately. It touches the core of what we are, our biology, our future, our children." He was not alone. In university laboratories, psychiatrists listening to hypnotic regressions began noticing the same sequence: light, paralysis, examination, extraction, return. No matter the culture or education, every witness used the same language of reproduction: eggs, womb seed, creation, always calm, always clinical, never cruelty, only purpose. The pattern was emerging, undeniable as the orbit of planets, the rhythm of collection, the harvest of potential, and beneath that rhythm pulsed a deeper implication, that humanity was being studied, not from afar, but from within, through the very mechanisms that allow life to continue. The night sky, once the canvas of myth, had become a laboratory ceiling. The visitors were no longer just watchers, they were participants, and the human body, the cradle of life itself, had become both subject and collaborator in a cosmic experiment whose scope no one yet understood. By the early 1980s, what had once been rumor had matured into pattern, and that pattern was beginning to look disturbingly deliberate. The faces and names changed, but the core remained: rooms of light, silent beings, instruments that floated and glowed, a sense of observation too intricate to be random. A new generation of witnesses came forward: authors, professionals, soldiers, and scientists, people with reputations to lose and no apparent reason to invent. They spoke with hesitation, their stories calm, coherent, and eerily consistent. Then came Whitley Strieber. His book Communion arrived in 1987, like a quiet earthquake. It wasn't a science fiction novel, though many assumed it must be. It was a memoir, an unflinching account of his encounters with entities who seemed both alien and deeply intimate. He described a sterile, blue-lit environment, humming with low electrical sound. Figures surrounded him, small, gray-skinned, with dark eyes that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. He could not move, but he could feel, and what he felt wasn't cruelty. It was curiosity, a focused intent that transcended emotion. He remembered long, thin instruments. He remembered a hand touching his head, the sense of being scanned from within, and then something sharper, a procedure that centered not on his mind, but on his body's ability to create life. When he woke, he felt violated, but also transformed, as if a door had opened in his understanding of existence itself. Communion became a cultural mirror. People who had never dared to speak found their voices in its pages. Letters poured in by the thousands from readers who had seen, felt, and remembered the same thing. So many from so many countries, recalling the same blue rooms, the same light, the same clinical precision. The details matched too neatly to dismiss. This wasn't madness or imagination. It was a map, traced through memory. In Philadelphia, Dr. David Jacobs, a historian at Temple University, was listening. He had been quietly studying abduction reports for years, but now he began cataloging them with academic rigor. He noticed the language witnesses used. They didn't describe operations or tests. They used words like harvesting, collection, and program. He conducted hundreds of interviews, each under hypnosis, documenting every physical detail, every sensation. When he laid those accounts side by side, a story began to take shape, too structured to be dream, too organized to be chaos. Eggs and sperm were being taken. Pregnancies appeared, then vanished. Women spoke of being shown hybrid infants, half familiar, half alien, children with human skin tones, but luminous eyes that shimmered faintly like mercury. These were not isolated cases, they were global. He realized he wasn't looking at random abductions. He was observing the phases of a program. The conclusion formed quietly, almost unwillingly. This was not simple study. It was interbreeding, systematic, generational, and evolutionary in scope. Jacobs tried to resist the implications. As a scholar, he demanded evidence, biological samples, physical proof. But the data that mattered most wasn't in a lab. It was in the patterns of human memory. So many unrelated individuals dreaming the same impossible dream. By then, other researchers were converging on the same realization. Dr. John Mack at Harvard would later approach the subject from a psychiatric and spiritual angle. But even before his arrival, Jacobs saw the outlines of a long-term operation unfolding: initial contact, collection of genetic material, creation of hybrids, presentation of offspring to human parents, gradual adaptation, hybrids learning, evolving, preparing for integration, and behind it all, a mystery that refused to be framed as either benevolent or malicious. The beings did not announce themselves as invaders, but neither did they ask for permission. They were gardeners of life, or perhaps archivists of it, tending to the human genome as if it were part of a much larger experiment in cosmic evolution. By the mid-1980s, hypnosis tapes and field notes filled shelves in Hopkins and Jacobs' studies. Witnesses were often unaware of one another, yet described identical sensations: a gentle hum that seemed to sync with their heartbeat, a telepathic voice, assuring calm, a sense that something sacred, though incomprehensible, was happening. One woman, under hypnosis, whispered through tears. They said it was necessary, that something in them was dying, and something in us could save it. Whether metaphor or truth, that sentence haunted everyone who heard it. The reproductive focus wasn't simply about theft, it was about survival, perhaps of both species, a collaboration unspoken, written in genes rather than treaties. By the end of the decade, the pattern could no longer be ignored. The puzzle pieces, Betty Hill's needle, Villas Boas's union, Andre Asson's glowing embryo, Strieber's surgical light, fit together with chilling elegance. Across 30 years, humanity had been quietly participating in a genetic dialogue older than civilization itself, and as the 1980s closed, one question lingered like a pulse beneath every case file, every whispered confession. Why our children? Why our DNA? Was it evolution guided by unseen hands, a merging of two dying lines into one, or a lesson whispered from a future version of ourselves, returning to perfect what we once began? Whatever the answer, the witnesses all said the same thing. The beings never seemed foreign, not truly. When they looked into those vast black eyes, they felt not fear, but recognition. Chapter 2. The Genetic Harvest. Imagine waking in a room without corners, no shadows, no visible walls, just light, blue, soft, pervasive, spilling from every surface as if the air itself were luminous. You cannot move, yet you are not afraid. There's a gentle vibration beneath your skin, and in that vibration, the sense of being watched not by eyes, but by awareness itself. This is where the stories begin to merge. Across decades and continents, abductees describe the same environment, sterile, serene, surgical, the same sensation of lying upon a table that feels alive, warm, responsive. It molds to their form, holding them weightless, without pressure. They feel the cool kiss of instruments that move without touch, gliding across their skin as if guided by invisible hands. And somewhere, behind that calm, there is always purpose. In these rooms, pain does not exist in the way we understand it. There is pressure, stretching, vibration, but no agony, no blood. When fear rises, a thought appears inside the mind: do not be afraid. The message doesn't come from words, but from presence, telepathic, maternal, authoritative. Witnesses describe the same sequence. First, observation, beings standing or floating near the table, heads tilting in unison, their large black eyes catching every flicker of emotion. Then procedure. For women, an awareness of something inserted deep within, a sense of extraction, of eggs retrieved through a needle so thin it seems made of light. They see long silver tubes humming faintly, the sound like wind moving through glass. There's no struggle, only stillness, resignation, sometimes awe. One woman, a teacher from Oregon, remembered through hypnosis the voice that guided her through the event. She said it wasn't cruel, it was instructive. "We need this," the voice said. "It is for the continuation of life." When she asked whose life, the voice did not answer, only silence, filled with meaning she couldn't translate. For men, the stories are strikingly similar: a device placed over the groin, cold and metallic, yet almost weightless, a pulling sensation, a faint hum that vibrated through the body like a note sustained in an unseen instrument. When it ended, there was fatigue, but also a strange sense of calm, like the moment after release or birth. Something had been taken, but something had also been shared. No one in these rooms hears footsteps, no doors open or close. The beings simply move, they glide, they appear beside you as if the air itself delivered them, small, hairless, thin as shadows, their skin grayish-white, with faint bluish undertones. The eyes dominate, the color of night glass, bottomless, reflective of nothing. They do not speak, they do not need to. Their thoughts arrive inside yours, precise and neutral, like instructions delivered through light. Abductees often describe a moment when their attention shifts to a single being, the one who seems in command. They sense authority, not through dominance, but through composure. That being might raise a hand, and suddenly everything stops. The sound, the movement, even thought itself. Time compresses, folds, and then as quickly as it began, the sensation of release. The body loosens, breath returns. Memory fragments scatter like sand through fingers. Later, upon waking, the experiencer finds no wounds, only faint marks, tiny punctures, in geometric arrangements, circular patterns that vanish in days. But inside the mind, something lingers: the hum, the smell of ozone, the faint warmth on the skin, and a question that refuses to fade. Why me? Why us? In one recorded session from Budd Hopkins archives, a woman whispered under trance, "They said our species is precious, that we carry something they cannot make." She described being shown an embryo suspended in fluid, pulsing softly, luminous as moonlight. It was, she said, both human and not. This theme, the merging of biology, echoes again and again across the testimonies. The procedures are not chaotic dissections, but measured exchanges, as though two civilizations were trading materials for the preservation of a shared inheritance, a biological covenant written in light. Doctors who reviewed post-abduction medical records noted abnormalities: elevated hormone levels, tissue inflammation, consistent with minor laparoscopic surgery, but no scars, no evidence of conventional intrusion. In some cases, there was even healing of prior injuries, as if the process itself had repaired more than it had taken. And still, the witnesses spoke of the same overwhelming silence. The machinery made no sound. The beings made no sound, only that faint hum. The resonance of purpose filled the room. It is in that hum, perhaps, where the truth hides, not in violence or fear, but in precision, a collection carried out, not for conquest, but for continuity. A harvest not of resources, but of future potential, and as the accounts multiplied, one chillingly gentle reality became impossible to ignore. Whatever intelligence orchestrated these acts understood human anatomy with surgical mastery. They knew what to take, what to leave, and how to erase the evidence, all while maintaining the illusion of dream. This was not random experimentation, it was replication, an ongoing project stretching across generations, the human genome, carefully sampled, preserved and perhaps rewritten. Those who have been there say the rooms are not built the way we build. There are no seams, no bolts, no panels, no visible sources of light. Everything seems to grow out of itself, as though the space were alive, responding to the will of its occupants. When you look at a wall, it shifts subtly, like muscle beneath skin. When you touch the surface of a table, it softens, forming to the contour of your hand. It feels less like metal and more like thought condensed into matter. Descriptions vary, but not by much. Some call the surfaces silver, others white-blue, others translucent like frost. They all speak of a glow that comes from nowhere and everywhere at once, diffuse and perfect. There are no shadows, nothing mechanical hums or vibrates, yet the air itself carries a low resonance that vibrates through the ribs. You feel it more than hear it. In that light, the beings move with perfect grace. Small frames, thin limbs, oversized heads. The eyes, vast, fluid, dark, reflect everything yet reveal nothing. They seem both curious and ancient, like the gaze of a parent watching an infant discover fire. They are not cold. They are not kind. They simply are. Witnesses report that the beings communicate in pulses of thought, not words. A question rises in your mind, and before you speak it, an answer arrives. Gentle, neutral, factual. There is no emotion, but there is understanding. You sense that they have done this countless times before. You are not the first, and you will not be the last. The tools they use appear sentient in themselves. One man described instruments like strands of mercury, curling midair in precise arcs. They adjust on their own, shifting shape as the beings glance toward them. No one handles them directly. They float, hum, and return to stillness once their task is done. Many abductees recall being scanned by a device that looks like a thin metallic ring hovering inches above the body. It emits a faint vibration, moving slowly from head to toe. Some say it feels like being submerged in warm water. Others feel a sudden rush of euphoria, followed by profound calm. When it passes over the chest, the heartbeat syncs with its rhythm, a biological resonance, perfect and unnatural. There are reports of smaller spheres of light, no larger than marbles, that drift through the air like fireflies. They pause beside the face, blink, and seem to study expression. A few subjects said they could feel the spheres reading their thoughts, peeling back layers of memory, like pages. When the beings are finished, the orbs withdraw and dissolve into the air, as if reabsorbed by the room itself. Some abductees describe being moved through corridors that twist without angles. The floor seems to glide beneath them. They feel no footsteps, no resistance, as if their bodies are being carried, not by force, but by intent. Doors do not open, they ripple, walls breathe, and yet despite this impossible architecture, everything feels clean, ordered, and purposeful, a place designed for precision, not cruelty. The Linda Cortiel case of 1989 brought these details into chilling alignment. In Manhattan, a woman claimed to have been lifted from her 12th-floor apartment window into a hovering craft, witnessed by security personnel and a political figure whose identity was kept secret for years. Under hypnosis, she described the same blue-white light, the same floating instruments, the same presence of calm observers. Her case was remarkable, not for what she saw, but for what others saw from below. A woman encased in light, rising through the air toward a disc-shaped object hovering over the East River. The logistics seemed impossible, yet the witnesses' accounts matched, and when she returned, her body bore the familiar marks: small circular bruises, symmetrical punctures behind the knees, and at the base of the spine. Investigators noted something else. The being seemed capable of operating in both the physical and non-physical. Doors and walls offered no resistance. Distance collapsed at will. To them, matter behaved like suggestion, pliable, obedient. One could only wonder, were these advanced biological entities using technology far beyond us, or was the technology itself alive? Many experiencers said that during the procedures, they felt not like captives, but participants. They sensed that their thoughts were read and mirrored, that the beings knew when fear rose, and instantly dampened it with waves of calm. A few described seeing, in brief glimpses, their own reflections in the beings' dark eyes, but altered, their faces slightly elongated, their eyes wider, as though the reflection showed what they were becoming. It is this sense of familiarity that unsettles most researchers. The technology is alien, yes, but the presence feels familial. Every gesture, every soundless exchange carries a strange tenderness, as if these beings are caretakers tending to a fragile lineage, one that includes us. When subjects awaken, they often report an afterimage, an imprint of the light, lingering in the mind for days, flashes of blue under closed eyelids, echoes of the hum in silence, and in some, a yearning to return, not out of fear, but longing. Perhaps it is not the machines that matter most, but the memory they leave behind, the quiet certainty that for a few impossible moments, the boundary between human and something other dissolved completely. For those who awaken after these encounters, morning feels different. The body remembers before the mind does. There's a soreness beneath the ribs, a faint tingling in the fingertips, a sense that the blood itself hums a half-forgotten tune. And then, the discovery, marks that were not there before. They appear in patterns too deliberate for accident, perfect circles, as though made by a medical instrument smaller than a needle, 3 dots forming a triangle behind the ear, a crescent of tiny bruises along the inner thigh, a row of faint depressions running up the spine, symmetrical as code. They do not ache, they do not swell, they simply exist as if printed upon the skin with invisible ink that fades in a few days' time. One woman described waking to find a thin line of raised skin crossing her abdomen, healed cleanly, as though weeks old. Her doctor, puzzled, said it looked like the scar of a laparoscopic incision, yet her medical record showed no such surgery. Another man reported a circular scar on his lower leg that appeared overnight, perfectly cauterized, no infection, no trauma. He was a machinist. He worked with no tools capable of such precision. Over time, these cases multiplied. Hopkins and Jacobs cataloged dozens of photographs, geometric burn marks, deep tissue bruising, puncture wounds that vanished within hours. Medical tests often revealed abnormal healing, faster than expected, sometimes complete within a single night. The human body, it seemed, was being touched by something that understood its chemistry better than we do. But the physical traces were only part of the puzzle. More baffling were the absences, the hours unaccounted for. A commuter leaving work at dusk arrives home near midnight, with no memory of the drive. A couple wakes at dawn, their alarm clocks reset, both certain that only minutes had passed. Watches stop at the same moment, their mechanisms magnetized beyond repair. Car batteries die in perfect synchrony. These fragments of missing time became one of the phenomenon's most consistent fingerprints, evidence of a world that folds around those who witness it, leaving only silence where ours should be. And then there were the pregnancies. Doctors called them phantom gestations, but the women who lived them used gentler, stranger words: borrowed children, star seeds, temporary souls. At first there were symptoms familiar to any expectant mother: morning nausea, fatigue, hormonal shifts, swelling of the breasts. Tests confirmed conception, but by the second trimester, the fetus was gone. No bleeding, no miscarriage, simply gone. The uterus, once expanded, returned to its normal size. The medical record would read spontaneous resolution. The women, however, called it something else: retrieval. One experiencer told Hopkins under hypnosis that she had seen her unborn child again, not on Earth, but aboard a craft filled with light. Rows of glass-like chambers lined the walls, each holding infants pale and luminous, their eyes opening and closing in slow rhythm with the hum of the room. She was allowed to hold one small, fragile, skin translucent as candle wax. It looked up at her, with eyes too large, too knowing. A voice, calm and sexless, spoke in her mind: "This one carries your line." When she awoke, her arms ached with the memory of its weight. To researchers, such accounts might sound like dreams born of grief, but when hundreds of unrelated women described the same event, the same rooms, the same infants, the same strange tenderness, the boundary between dream and documentation began to blur. Then came the anomalies in medical imaging. Implants, metallic and microscopic, found in nasal cavities, behind ears, in the soft tissue of thighs. When removed, they disintegrated within hours. Biopsies revealed no known alloy. Crystalline structures arranged in symmetrical lattices, smaller than human nanotechnology. Some emitted faint electromagnetic frequencies before collapsing into inert dust. In one case, a tiny triangular fragment discovered beneath a woman's skin was analyzed under electron microscopy. The lattice appeared biological, like bone grown around metal, hybrid material, living and manufactured, indistinguishable from either. Blood samples told the same paradoxical story: unusual ratios of trace elements, antibodies not present in general populations, and cell regeneration rates bordering on impossible. In some abductees, white blood cell counts fluctuated wildly, between tests taken only hours apart. As if the immune system itself had been momentarily rewritten, then restored. The medical world, bound by data and repetition, could not confirm these events, but neither could it explain them away. For every skeptical study, there remained a residue of mystery: charts that didn't align, wounds that healed too quickly, pregnancies that began and ended beyond comprehension. And so the evidence accumulated quietly, a collection of impossibilities tucked into private files and whispered conversations. Each mark, each missing hour, each vanished child, was a footnote in a story that seemed larger than human agency. It was as if something, or someone, was curating the future by touching the human body directly, rewriting its story at the cellular level. Those who experienced it rarely spoke in terms of violation. Instead, they spoke of participation, of being chosen, of playing a role in an exchange that neither science nor faith could yet define. And in the silence that followed each confession, researchers would hear the same soft refrain, repeated like a mantra learned in dreams. They said, "It's not over." Chapter 3. Mothers of the Missing. It often begins the same way: a missed period, a small surge of hope, the tender weight of possibility settling in the body, a quiet joy, private and fragile, unfolding in the lives of women who believed life was about to take root within them. They buy the test. The small plastic stick confirms what they already feel: a faint pink line, a promise whispered through chemistry. The body changes. Nausea comes in the morning. A soft ache builds in the lower belly. Dreams shift. They become warmer, gentler, threaded with light. But then something strange happens. The next appointment brings silence where a heartbeat should be. The ultrasound shows nothing, not an empty sac, not a still fetus, nothing. The womb is clean, untouched. The doctor frowns, double checks, orders blood work. Within days, hormone levels fall to normal. The body forgets, but the heart cannot. For some, this experience becomes a quiet grief. For others, it becomes something impossible to explain. Because deep inside, they know the child was there. They remember the spark of movement beneath their skin, the pulse of another heartbeat, synchronized with their own. And then, the night when everything changed. They wake to a strange glow, filling the room. The air feels charged, thick with static. A vibration moves through the walls, through the mattress, through their bones. Paralysis sets in, not of terror, but of command. A soft voice, calm and sexless, fills the mind. Do not be afraid. And then, stillness, a sense of rising, of weightlessness, of floating through light. Sensation of hands, delicate, long-fingered, touching the belly with clinical care. A presence that feels both foreign and familiar, like a memory of being touched by the sea. Some recall hearing a tone, faint and melodic, like the hum of a lullaby sung by machines. Then the descent, darkness again, sleep. Morning brings exhaustion, confusion, and an ache that feels like loss. They go to the doctor, and the news arrives in cold, flat sentences. There's nothing there. There must have been a misread. These things happen. But for the women who live it, the loss is not abstract. It's physical. It's maternal. It feels like the sudden absence of connection, as if someone has taken not only what was inside them, but what was meant to be. Researchers call this the missing fetus syndrome, sterile term for an experience soaked in emotion. It appears in case files from the 1970s onward, women reporting pregnancies that vanished overnight, with no bleeding, no miscarriage, no sign of natural end. Blood tests that once confirmed conception later show nothing. Doctors dismiss them gently, telling them it was hormonal fluctuation, chemical misfire. But the timing, the consistency, and the dreams that accompany the loss tell another story. In hypnotic sessions, these women recall images of bright rooms and translucent walls. They remember lying flat, unable to move, while beings in pale uniforms worked quietly around them. They describe instruments shaped like slender rods of light, gliding effortlessly across the body. They remember a small embryo, taken, not destroyed, and a thought shared telepathically. It will live, but not here. The emotion that surfaces is not terror, but maternal grief of an ancient kind, the heartbreak of giving life, but being denied its company. When they speak, their voices tremble not with fear, but with longing. One woman told Hopkins, her words slow and careful. They said the child was needed, that it couldn't survive in our air. Another whispered through tears, they told me I would see her again when the time was right. Doctors who reviewed these testimonies could not offer explanations that fit. There were no signs of delusion, no psychosis, no shared hysteria, only vivid, consistent memories, physiological symptoms without pathology, too similar to dismiss, too impossible to accept. Among researchers, a quiet hypothesis began to take form. What if these pregnancies were never meant to go to term? What if they were transfers, a process by which fertilized eggs were removed, matured elsewhere, and nurtured in environments unknown to us? The idea sounded like science fiction, yet every witness described it as reality. Some even felt the lingering connection, as if part of their energy remained bound to something far away. And so the term phantom pregnancy fails to capture what they truly experienced. These were not false hopes or biological errors, they were real beginnings, redirected. Lives started here, continued elsewhere. Tonight, as we drift through their memories, you may sense that sorrow yourself, that quiet ache of love without closure. Because perhaps the mothers of these missing children are not mourning an end, but but waiting for a reunion written in DNA. The hum fades, the stars outside the window blink like incubators in the dark, and somewhere, beyond the reach of our understanding, a generation of children may be opening their eyes for the first time. The dreams begin months, sometimes years after the loss. They are not like ordinary dreams, not the scattered fragments of the day's noise. They are structured, lucid, and achingly vivid. The women say they can feel temperature, texture, the faint scent of metal and ozone in the air, and always the same setting. A room filled with soft blue light, curved walls that seem to shimmer, and rows upon rows of transparent containers glowing from within. Inside each one, something stirs. The first woman to speak of such a dream was a nurse from Vermont in 1978. She had experienced a vanished pregnancy the year before. Test confirmed. Embryo gone. In her dream, she found herself walking barefoot across a glass-like floor. Her feet made no sound. Ahead, shadowy figures moved with calm precision, tending to the glowing chambers. Each held an infant, small, pale, perfectly formed, their skin translucent enough to show the faint trace of veins like threads of light. She said she recognized one instantly. "I just knew," she told the interviewer. "It was mine. I could feel it in my chest, like my heart recognized it before my eyes did." She described holding the child, not in her arms, but suspended in light, as if gravity had been turned off for both of them. The baby blinked slowly, its eyes large and dark, reflecting galaxies instead of pupils. When she tried to speak, a thought entered her mind. "You will see me again." When she awoke, tears streamed down her face. Her arms still tingled with the phantom sensation of touch. Over the following decades, hundreds of similar accounts emerged. Different continents, different cultures, same details, the same architecture, the same light, the same soft hum beneath the silence. Researchers began calling them nursery visits. For many, they were not nightmares. They were reunions. Betty Andreasson, whose encounters had begun years earlier, described being shown a small child with skin like waxed pearl and eyes wider than human proportions. The beings told her the child was hers, the result of her own genetic material combined with theirs. When she held it, she said, she felt an overwhelming love, unlike anything she had known. The being who guided her placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Your love is needed for their development." It was as if emotion itself was nourishment, as if the human heart had become part of the laboratory process. In other testimonies, the nurseries appear as vast halls suspended in starlight, hundreds of transparent pods, each softly pulsing with a living glow. Some women describe seeing beings moving between them, adjusting the light, humming in tones that vibrated through the air. They speak of those hums as lullabies, frequencies designed to soothe and stimulate at once. When they stand near the pods, they feel their own hearts respond, beating in rhythm with the sound. Sometimes they cry, sometimes they feel whole again, and then the dream ends. Always suddenly. The room dissolves. They wake with tears and an aching warmth in the chest, grief mixed with reverence. Psychiatrists who studied the phenomenon were unsettled by the precision. In traditional dreams, details fade. Here they remain exact. Angles, lights, sounds, sensations. Many subjects described smells of antiseptic, a hint of sweetness in the air, the temperature of the room hovering at perfect neutrality. Some even noted the same visual trick. The walls seemed closer than they were, as if the entire space curved inward like a living womb. Dr. John Mack would later interpret these experiences, not as delusion, but as contact events, encounters taking place on a border between the physical and the spiritual. He wrote that the emotions described by the mothers were too profound to belong to fantasy. They were archetypal, the return of the lost child, the sacred reunion of creator and creation. Still, others remained convinced these were memories, not symbols. The women described the infant's aging, tiny newborns in early encounters, toddlers in later ones, standing beside the beings who guided them. One mother said she saw her child again after 5 years. "He looked 5, she said softly. "He smiled when he saw me. He reached out his hand. His fingers were long and thin, but when I touched them, I could feel the same warmth as my own skin." The next instant, she woke, her hand raised in the dark, trembling. Whether symbolic or literal, these nursery visions share one common thread: they heal something invisible. The women who experience them often report that grief softens afterward. A sense of peace replaces despair. They no longer feel empty, but connected, as though their children are safe, somewhere beyond distance, waiting. And perhaps that is the quiet mercy of these encounters, that in the silence of the night, when the body is still and the mind floats free, a mother may once again feel her child's heartbeat, not beside her, but within her. Maybe this is how memory works, across worlds. Maybe love itself is the bridge. There is a kind of grief that has no language. It lives beneath speech, behind the eyes, where memory and longing touch but never fully meet. For many of the women who experience the disappearances, that is where they live now, between knowing and doubt, between the warmth of connection and the cold edge of disbelief. They do not speak easily of what happened, not because they have forgotten, but because words shrink the magnitude of it. To say, "My pregnancy vanished," invites pity. To say, "I held my child in a room of light among beings not of this earth," invites isolation. And so, they remain silent, carrying an invisible inheritance, a story too sacred and too strange for the world to hold. When they gather, they recognize one another instantly. There are no introductions, no need to explain. They see the same fatigue around the eyes, the same searching softness in the face. At first, they talk in whispers, describing ordinary life, cooking, work, sleep, until someone says the word light, and the room changes. The air becomes charged, heavy with unspoken memory, and slowly, gently, they begin to share. The support groups began in the late 1980s, quietly, through handwritten letters and private meetings. They met in community halls, church basements, living rooms filled with low lamps and folded blankets. Some came trembling. Others brought notebooks filled with sketches of faces that weren't human yet felt familiar. In these rooms, they found something they had lost: validation. They weren't insane. They weren't alone. Their experiences, the pregnancies, the disappearances, the nursery visits, all shared the same rhythm. They called themselves the Rememberers. In one meeting, a woman read from her diary, "When I wake, I feel her near me. I don't know if she's breathing the same air or light years away, but I can feel her heartbeat echoing in mine." Another woman, younger, spoke about the guilt she carried, guilt that she couldn't protect her child, guilt that she didn't fight harder against something she couldn't even name. A third reminded her softly, "You didn't lose your child. You gave her to the stars." Over time, the sessions began to resemble ceremonies, not of worship, but of remembrance. Candles were lit. A few women closed their eyes and described seeing their children as older, healthy, luminous, surrounded by serenity. Some reported sensing their presence during meditation or prayer, the faint impression of small hands or warm energy resting against their shoulders. Researchers who observed these gatherings were struck not by hysteria, but by calm. The women spoke with reverence, not fear. The experiences had left them scarred, yes, but also somehow awakened, their grief transformed into a kind of cosmic empathy. They no longer saw their abductors as monsters. They began to see them as caretakers, custodians of something precious and fragile: continuity. A pattern emerged among the rememberers. Their health often improved after the experiences. Chronic conditions faded, energy levels stabilized. Some developed heightened intuition, bursts of creativity, dreams that bled into waking insight. One mother, a violinist, began composing music based entirely on tones she said she heard during her abductions, low, sustained frequencies that soothed her nerves, and she claimed, quieted her nightmares. Others took to painting, drawing the faces of their children with haunting precision, human features stretched by subtle otherness, yet radiating unmistakable warmth. Still, not all found peace. For some, the memories grew heavier with time, pressing like a weight on the heart. They spoke of the sound that haunted them, a tone that lingered at the edge of hearing, the same sound they remembered from the rooms of light. It would rise faintly in the stillness of night, vibrating through glass and water, calling them back to a place they could never return. These moments filled them with yearning, a pull that felt maternal, primal, and eternal. Others reported more tangible reminders, a faint hum before sleep, dreams that ended with a glimpse of large, dark eyes watching them gently. A single thought whispered across the boundary of consciousness, "They remember you." That sentence, above all, became the salve for their grief. The idea that somewhere, beyond human comprehension, their children, the hybrid offspring of two worlds, remembered the love that created them, that they carried that love as memory encoded in their being, passed from mother to child, across stars and generations. When Budd Hopkins and later Dr. Mack documented these testimonies, they noticed how the language of loss turned gradually into the language of transformation. It was no longer about abduction or experiment. It was about exchange. Something had been taken, yes, but something had also been given: perspective, connection, a new definition of what it means to be alive. Near the end of one session, an older woman whispered to the group, "I used to ask why they took them. Now I ask why I was chosen to give." And in that sentence lay the essence of all the others, a burden carried with grace, a grief transmuted into awe. So perhaps missing is the wrong word. Perhaps these mothers are not waiting for their children to return. Perhaps they are waiting for humanity to remember where its children have gone. And when that remembering comes, in dreams, in science, in the shared rhythm of DNA, their burden will no longer be sorrow but revelation. Chapter 4. The Hybrid Programs. He never set out to chase UFOs. Budd Hopkins was a painter, an artist drawn to geometry, color, and symmetry, not to the shadows between the stars. But in the 1970s, he began to notice something that his canvases could not contain: the strange geometry of human experience, the patterns hidden beneath ordinary lives. It began with a friend. One summer evening, a woman he knew came to him trembling. She spoke of a light above her car, a paralysis, a stretch of missing time she could not account for. She wasn't looking for belief. She was looking for release. Hopkins listened. He sketched the scene as she described it: the light, the curve of the road, the way the trees leaned like witnesses. But what struck him most was her calm precision. This wasn't hysteria. This was testimony. As an artist, Hopkins was trained to notice repetition, the hidden rhythm that connects one image to another. Over the next few years, more people found him, some through letters, some through whispers passed at conferences or art openings. They all carried fragments of the same pattern: bright light, paralysis, the table, the instruments, and the beings. Hopkins began to record them, one case at a time, using hypnosis, not as spectacle, but as a gentle doorway back into memory. What emerged was a mosaic of impossible detail: men and women from across the country, unrelated by geography or culture, describing the same procedures: the extraction of reproductive material, the presence of small hybrid children, the feeling of calm instruction. The more he listened, the clearer the architecture became. This wasn't chaos, it was a program. Hopkins started keeping detailed logs. He labeled each testimony with coded initials to protect identities, cross-referencing every event, location, time, physical evidence, psychological after effects. Patterns formed like constellations on paper. Night after night, he saw the same sequence replayed through different lives: lights in the sky, the paralysis, the sterile room, the procedure, and afterward, the sense of loss, as if something intimate had been taken, not stolen but borrowed. He coined the term missing fetus syndrome, a clinical phrase that masked something heartbreaking: pregnancies confirmed, then vanished. Hundreds of women, separated by time and distance, describing the same experience in precise language. They weren't colluding, they didn't know each other, but they were, somehow, part of the same script. Hopkins documented cases that reached beyond imagination. One woman described waking in a blinding white room to see a being cradling a small hybrid infant. It looked part human, part other, frail, beautiful, unfinished. When she reached to touch it, a thought entered her mind: "You gave this to us." Moments later, she was back in her bed, her arms empty, the air still humming with the echo of that voice. Another woman, a musician from New Mexico, recalled under hypnosis a conversation that left Hopkins silent for minutes. She said the beings told her, "You carry light that can be shaped." When asked what that meant, she began to cry softly and said, "They mean life." Hopkins didn't see himself as a believer or a skeptic. He was an archivist of mystery, preserving details others dismissed. He meticulously gathered data, biological samples, witness sketches, photographs of markings, and compared them against conventional explanations. Yet again and again, logic failed. How could unrelated individuals describe identical technology decades before it existed? How could scars appear overnight, or pregnancies vanish without trace? If it were fantasy, why was it organized? In the years that followed, Hopkins' New York apartment became both studio and sanctuary. Canvases leaned against walls painted with half-finished abstractions, while folders of testimonies covered every surface. His tape recorder clicked softly through the night as he interviewed witnesses, his voice calm, patient, curious. He wasn't chasing proof of aliens. He was tracing the evolution of an idea that the human species might be participating, knowingly or not, in its own transformation. He began to speak publicly about what he had found. In lectures he used the language of art, composition, symmetry, intention. The phenomenon, he said, behaves like an artist's process. It refines, it repeats, it improves upon itself. Each generation of abductees seemed to describe a refinement in the hybrids they encountered, from frail, near-featureless infants to beings who appeared increasingly human. He wondered aloud if the goal wasn't invasion, but integration. To the scientific community, his claims were untenable. To the people who had lived the experiences, they were validation. Hopkins gave their pain structure, their confusion context. He offered not answers, but acknowledgement. And in doing so, he uncovered something larger than belief, a pattern that stretched across human biology, memory, and perhaps time itself. By the mid-1980s, he had collected hundreds of cases pointing toward one quiet, persistent truth. Whatever intelligence was behind these encounters, it was guiding humanity towards something, not destruction, but continuation, emerging, a bridge between worlds, carried in the fragile form of life itself. And somewhere in his notebooks, beneath years of sketches and case codes, Hopkins wrote a single line that summarized it all: "They are not taking from us, they are making with us." Where Budd Hopkins approached the phenomenon like an artist, through empathy, symbol, and story, Dr. David Jacobs approached it like a surgeon of data. He was not drawn by mystery, but by the puzzle of human consistency. As a historian at Temple University, Jacobs had spent years studying culture, evidence, and the patterns of belief that shape memory. But when he began examining the recorded sessions of abductees, something shifted. He expected chaos. What he found was order. The testimonies followed the same structure across age, education, and geography. There was the light, the paralysis, the removal from home, and the clinical procedure, as predictable as a protocol. Jacobs began recording every word, every breath, cataloging with academic precision. Soon his office resembled an intelligence archive, walls lined with cassettes, transcripts stacked like geological strata of human experience. Each case reinforced the next. The details never diverged. It was as though hundreds of witnesses were describing different rooms of the same facility. He began to suspect that Hopkins' missing fetus syndrome was only one phase of a far greater sequence. There was structure behind the chaos, a multi-generational plan that appeared to unfold in steps. Stage 1. Collection. Eggs, sperm, DNA samples gathered under anesthesia of telepathic calm. Stage 2. Creation. Embryos grown elsewhere, in environments described as fluid-filled or crystalline. Stage 3. Introduction. Mothers shown hybrid infants, encouraged to hold them, bond with them, infuse them with emotion. Stage 4. Integration. The hybrids slowly maturing, learning to emulate human behavior, studying empathy, expression, and speech. When Jacobs laid these phases against the timeline of abduction reports, the synchronization was chilling. The earliest stories from the 1950s and 60s focused on collection. By the 70s and 80s, reports shifted toward the presentation of children, and in more recent cases, witnesses described fully grown hybrids moving among us, studying, adapting, blending. It was, he wrote, a program of continuity, not visitation, but colonization by biology, a process so subtle it unfolded inside our own genome. Unlike Hopkins, Jacobs had no interest in metaphors or mysticism. He was pragmatic, disciplined, often skeptical of spiritual interpretations. His goal was to quantify, to measure. He trained subjects in calm breathing and grounded recall, avoiding suggestion. He insisted that data, not drama, must guide the investigation. But the more rigor he applied, the deeper the mystery grew. He interviewed hundreds of experiencers under controlled conditions, cross-checking every recollection against others. Each described identical beings, small, gray, hairless, with proportionally large heads and black eyes. Each recalled the same rooms, the same tools, the same sterile precision, and each, without prompting, spoke of the same emotion when shown hybrid children: overwhelming, instinctive love, a maternal bond beyond explanation, as if the body itself recognized its own blood. In the early 1990s, Jacobs began documenting the rise of what he termed integration encounters. Witnesses reported seeing hybrids not aboard ships but in ordinary places, city streets, subway stations, supermarkets. They appeared human, but something in the eyes gave them away, an unbroken focus, an absence of social rhythm. Sometimes they made brief telepathic contact, a flicker of awareness that lasted seconds, then they disappeared into crowds. To Jacobs, this confirmed the program's progression. He hypothesized that these hybrids were prototypes of assimilation, test cases preparing for a wider phase of coexistence. They are learning to live here, he wrote, to breathe our air, to speak our languages, to feel our emotions. It is not conquest, it is replacement through refinement. His critics dismissed this as apocalyptic fantasy, but Jacobs never claimed doom, only inevitability. He saw in these testimonies, not monsters, but a process guided by quiet efficiency. Evolution, he once said in a lecture, does not ask permission, it adapts through opportunity. Perhaps humanity itself had become the opportunity. What unnerved him most were the emotional residues left in his subjects. Many spoke of dual memory, the faint awareness of two lives running parallel, dreams in which they were both observer and observed. Some felt the hybrids calling them, not through words but through emotion, as though their bond had become permanent. A shared consciousness stretched across space, bound by genetics. When asked if he feared ridicule, Jacobs smiled wearily. "I'm a historian," he said. "My job is to recognize patterns before they become history." To the end of his career, he maintained one quiet conviction: the hybrid program was real, methodical, and nearing completion. He believed the final stage, full integration, had already begun, that the future generations of humanity would not arrive from distant stars, but from within us, children of both worlds, born not of invasion, but design. And perhaps somewhere between Hopkins' compassion and Jacobs' analysis, the truth balanced itself. that what we call abduction might be something older, larger, a continuation of life's single imperative to evolve, whatever the cost. By the time Dr. John Mack entered the story, the phenomenon had already spread beyond research circles. It had become a quiet undercurrent in the culture, whispered across late-night radio, dissected by skeptics and believers alike. But what the world saw as spectacle, Mack saw as symptom, or perhaps invitation. A psychiatrist, professor, and Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer, Mack had spent his career studying the human search for meaning. He had counseled trauma survivors, refugees, and soldiers. He knew the anatomy of fear. Yet, when a patient described being taken by luminous beings in the night, not with terror, but with reverence, something in him paused. The story did not sound like psychosis. It sounded like transformation. In the late 1980s, Mack began interviewing experiencers, men and women whose lives had been quietly split by encounters beyond comprehension. He expected to find delusion, dissociation, perhaps cultural contagion. What he found instead were ordinary people describing extraordinary experiences with consistent calm. They weren't seeking fame or profit. Most had hidden their stories for years. What they wanted was understanding. Under hypnosis, they spoke of the same themes documented by Hopkins and Jacobs: rooms of light, procedures focused on reproduction, the presentation of hybrid children. But Mack's attention moved past the medical into the emotional. He noticed that even as they recounted fear, their tone shifted toward awe. Many spoke of feeling chosen, not violated. They described messages of ecological warning, visions of Earth in distress, humanity out of balance, species vanishing beneath a warming sky. The beings, they said, were not invaders, but teachers. For Mack, the abduction narrative was not merely biological, it was spiritual evolution wearing the mask of science. He began to write that these encounters might represent a compensatory phenomenon, a correction of consciousness, a bridge between the material and the transcendent. To him, the hybrid children were not just genetic creations but symbols of integration, the merging of intellect and intuition, reason and wonder. At Harvard, his position gave him credibility and made him a target. When his work became public, the institution launched an internal inquiry, questioning his methods, his ethics, and at times his sanity. Colleagues accused him of believing his patients too much, of crossing the line between therapy and endorsement. But Mack held firm. He wasn't preaching extraterrestrials. He was documenting the psychology of transformation. He wrote, "These experiences, whatever their source, carry the power to shatter the boundaries of the self. They dismantle the illusion of separation between human and cosmos." In session after session, he saw the same metamorphosis. Patients arrived fearful, fragmented, haunted by memories of loss. They left calmer, luminous, connected to something larger than fear. When asked if they believed their abductions were real, most answered not with certainty, but with a strange humility. One woman said, "It happened in a way that's more real than waking life." Another whispered, "They showed me that consciousness is bigger than flesh." Mack began to frame the phenomenon as initiation, a rite of passage marking the evolution of the human spirit. He compared it to near-death experiences, shamanic visions, and the ancient myths of divine visitation. But where mythology spoke in symbol, these events wore the garments of modernity: craft, procedure, examination. The language had changed, the essence had not. His peers accused him of romanticizing trauma, of replacing analysis with mysticism. Yet, his calm persistence forced the scientific world to confront an uncomfortable truth: the line between psyche and cosmos might not be as solid as they believed. Perhaps consciousness was porous. Perhaps we were not the only minds moving through it. In private notes, Mack reflected on a haunting possibility. What if the beings were not external at all, but future humanity reaching backward, evolving through us? guiding its own birth. He wrote, "We may be midwives to our own transformation. The hybrids may be the bridge, the form that allows spirit and matter to finally coexist." Even after the Harvard inquiry cleared him of wrongdoing, Mack remained both respected and ridiculed, an academic wandering the frontier of mystery. He continued to interview experiencers until his death, still convinced that the phenomenon was expanding, adapting, evolving in tandem with our awareness of it. In one of his last recorded lectures he said softly, "If we view this through fear, we see abduction. If we view it through compassion, we see communion." That sentence would outlive him. Where Hopkins mapped the anatomy of the phenomenon, and Jacobs traced its mechanisms, John Mack traced its meaning. He transformed it from science fiction into spiritual anthropology, the study of how the cosmos touches the soul, and in doing so, he gave the hybrid narrative its most human dimension, the idea that perhaps what the visitors are creating is not a new species, but a new kind of consciousness, one capable of holding both fear and wonder, both earth and sky, both human and alien, in a single breath. Chapter 5. The New Generation. It begins, as so many mysteries do, in childhood, before skepticism takes root, before memory is told what is real and what is not. Across decades of interviews, parents began describing children who spoke casually of things no child should know, of friends who came through walls, of glowing figures who taught them to float, of dreams so consistent they felt like visits. These were not the frightened tales of nightmares, but stories told with calm certainty, as though describing ordinary events. A 5-year-old girl in Oregon once told her mother that the blue people had taken her to the circle room again. When asked what they did there, she said, "They just looked inside me. They said I was growing the way I'm supposed to." Her mother, unsettled, asked if she had been hurt. The child shook her head. "They said they made me special." A boy in rural England spoke of the tall lady who came to his room when it rained. She never used the door. She glowed faintly at the edges and hummed when she breathed. She would sit on his bed and touch his forehead with long fingers, whispering that he belonged to 2 homes. When asked what that meant, he replied simply, "I have another family in the sky." Researchers noticed something remarkable in these stories: the tone, no terror, no confusion, only quiet familiarity. As if these encounters were not abductions but reunions, many children described the same settings seen by adults: the rooms of curved light, the humming corridors, the luminous symbols on the walls that shifted like living script. They drew them in crayon and pencil, repeating circular symbols, spirals, 3-dot triangles, radiant eyes. Different continents, different languages, the same shapes. Parents, bewildered, often dismissed them as imagination, but when researchers compared drawings from children who had never met, the similarities were uncanny. In interviews, Budd Hopkins once observed that children's accounts felt purer than adult recollections. Without cultural baggage, they described events as direct experience, unedited by fear or expectation. They did not call them aliens or abductions. They said simply, "My friends from the light came back." One case from Canada in 1992 described a girl named Emily, who often spoke to the silver boy. Her parents assumed it was an imaginary friend until they found her one morning standing by her window, arms raised, eyes open but unfocused. When they called her name, she whispered, "He says he misses you too." When questioned later, she said the boy lived where there is no ceiling, and that he was learning to smile, like people do here. For some families, the visits seemed generational. A mother who reported her own experiences in the 1970s began noticing her children speaking of similar lights, similar dreams. When hypnotized decades later, she recalled being told, "It will continue through them." She understood then that whatever the program was, it didn't end with her body, it moved through her bloodline. Some of these children exhibited unusual sensitivities. They woke easily from sleep, often moments before earthquakes or storms. They displayed advanced empathy, able to sense moods or pain in others without explanation. Teachers noted how some seemed detached from aggression, responding to conflict with an eerie calm. One child told his therapist, "It's strange that people don't feel each other's feelings here." Parents searching for answers found online communities, sharing eerily similar experiences. They began using words like star children or hybrid souls, language both mystical and protective. For them, this wasn't science fiction, it was family. They spoke of bedtime as sacred, a threshold between worlds, where dreams became bridges. Through the 1990s and beyond, the accounts continued, children describing craft hovering silently outside bedroom windows, figures of light that communicated through emotion, not words, games played without touch, marbles that floated, drawings that glowed faintly in the dark, small things, easy to dismiss, but repeated with such calm clarity that researchers began to wonder, were these children not imagining but remembering? Psychiatrists who interviewed them noted another pattern, a lack of trauma markers. Whatever they were experiencing, it did not harm them in conventional ways. In fact, many seemed wiser, more self-assured. They carried a strange serenity, as though they had glimpsed something beyond the boundaries of fear. And always, the same message returned, simple, almost childlike in phrasing, yet profound in implication. Don't be scared, we're helping the world get ready. To the mothers who once grieved their missing children, these words were both haunting and healing. It meant the connection had not ended, it had multiplied. The children they lost were not gone, they were part of something continuing, something that might one day return to guide the very species that birthed them. And so the pattern, once confined to the abduction era, was now growing up, speaking in younger voices, dreaming through younger eyes. The hybrid generation was no longer a concept whispered in hypnosis. It was walking among playgrounds, sitting in classrooms, humming to itself beneath starlight. They were children of both worlds, born to remember what the rest of us had forgotten. When the children grew older, the stories changed. The glowing rooms faded from their dreams, replaced by fragments of memory they couldn't quite explain. Faces they recognized in strangers, eyes that felt too familiar, thoughts that weren't their own. Adolescence is always a time of transformation, but for some, it became something far stranger, a convergence of two inheritances, the human and the unknown. Across interviews from the late 1990s and early 2000s, young adults began describing memories that didn't belong to childhood. They recalled rooms of glass and silver, beings with eyes like mirrors filled with sky, and voices that spoke inside their heads with flawless calm. They described sensations of being tested, activated, or prepared. Many had no prior interest in UFOs or the paranormal. They were ordinary teenagers, students, musicians, athletes, until the dreams began. A 16-year-old girl from Colorado said she often woke at night feeling summoned. Her body would grow cold, her limbs heavy, and then she'd find herself standing by the window, staring upward as if waiting for someone. Sometimes, she said, the stars would rearrange themselves into symbols, spirals, triangles, a sequence of lights that pulsed like heartbeat code. She drew them each morning, hundreds of repeating patterns that researchers later found mirrored symbols seen in earlier abduction reports. Another case involved a boy from Finland, who spoke of the Watchers. He said they came in his sleep, tall, pale, neither human nor machine. They taught him to move objects with thought, to heal small cuts with touch, to sense when others were lying. He didn't boast about these things. He confessed them in quiet shame, afraid that people would think him insane. Just yet, when he demonstrated his perception, guessing words before they were spoken, predicting who was about to knock at the door, his mother grew pale. She remembered her own abduction, as a child, in the 1960s. The pattern, she realized, had continued through him. These teenagers were different, but not in ways science could easily measure. Their blood tests, brain scans, and genetic screenings showed nothing abnormal, and yet teachers described them as ahead of their peers, empathetic beyond reason, quick to grasp complex systems, prone to quiet solitude. They preferred night to day, stillness to noise. Many reported a persistent hum in their ears, a tone that grew louder before global events or natural disasters. One called it the frequency of change. Abduction researchers noted something else. The hybrids described by earlier generations, the children shown to abductees in sterile rooms, now appeared in these adolescents' lives as companions. They visited in dreams, or sometimes in waking moments that blurred the line between memory and manifestation. One girl described meeting a boy who looked perfectly human, except for the color of his eyes, silver gray, with faint rings of light around the pupils. He told her, "You won't remember this later, but you'll feel it." The next morning, she woke with a scar on her wrist, shaped like an unbroken circle. Whether literal or symbolic, these interactions followed a pattern of mentorship. The hybrids, or whatever presence they represented, seemed to be guiding their human counterparts toward awareness, teaching them empathy, telepathic sensitivity, even environmental stewardship. Jacobs noted that many teenagers in his case studies expressed an inexplicable dread of ecological collapse. They spoke of needing to heal the planet before the change, as though carrying an inherited responsibility. For some, this awareness felt too heavy. They struggled with depression, isolation, and the constant sense of being other. One young man described walking through crowds and feeling everyone's thoughts pressing against him like a physical tide. Another said she often dreamed of two skies, one bright, one dark, and a voice asking her which one she would belong to. As they aged, their resemblance to the beings of their memories grew subtle but undeniable. Eyes larger than average, a reflective sheen to the skin, unnaturally symmetrical features. Photographs sometimes caught something strange, a momentary glow, a flicker of light across the irises. Doctors dismissed it as lens flare, coincidence, but to the experiencers, it felt like recognition, like the mask of humanity was beginning to thin. Still, the tone of their accounts remained serene. They didn't speak of rebellion or invasion, they spoke of return, of preparing humanity to meet itself. One teenage girl wrote in her journal, "They say we are bridges, that when enough of us remember, the two kinds of life will become one." In the quiet corners of UFO research, whispers began circulating. The hybrid children were growing up. They were learning to blend, to move among us unnoticed, to feel like us, think like us, become us. And perhaps that was the purpose all along. Not domination, not science, but convergence. If so, the teenagers of the 1990s and early 2000s were only the first wave, the prototypes of a species learning to wear humanity like a familiar dream. They were not here to conquer, they were here to belong. They walk among us now, not as strangers in disguise, but as people you might pass on the street. The coworker whose eyes hold a little too much depth, the nurse who seems to sense your pain before you speak, the man on the train whose gaze flickers upward just before your phone loses signal. Ordinary faces, extraordinary silence. By the late 2000s, reports began to change once again, no longer about abductions or glowing rooms, but about recognition. Witnesses described moments of inexplicable connection, a handshake that sent a jolt of warmth through the spine, a stranger who seemed to know their name without introduction, a brief glance exchanged that felt like remembering an old friend after centuries apart. The phenomenon, once confined to the margins of night, had stepped quietly into daylight. Researchers, especially those who followed Jacobs' later work, called it the integration phase. Hybrids, they theorized, were no longer confined to controlled environments or observation. They were among us, living, studying, working, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of human civilization. No ships, no lights, no fanfare, just presence. The accounts came from every corner of the world. A woman in Sao Paulo who felt her heartbeat synchronize with a stranger's as they passed in a crowded subway. A doctor in Vancouver who treated a patient whose blood type seemed chemically impossible. A variation of Rh factors that didn't match any known human pairing. A young man in Tokyo who dreamed every night of a silver corridor, then met a coworker with the same dream. They finished each other's sentences before realizing neither had spoken aloud. To outsiders, these stories sounded like coincidence. To those who had lived through abduction, it was continuation, proof that the children shown in nurseries of light had matured and walked the earth. Witnesses described these new hybrids as unusually composed. They rarely displayed anger. They observed before reacting. Their speech carried a rhythm both precise and oddly melodic, as if tuned to a frequency just outside hearing. Many were drawn to medicine, technology, and humanitarian work, fields concerned with preservation, not destruction. They seemed to understand instinctively how systems broke and how to repair them. Some described subtle physical differences, eyes with faint inner luminescence when light struck them at certain angles, unusual symmetry in facial structure, skin that healed with impossible speed, a faint warmth to the touch, like low current beneath the skin. None of it extreme enough to prove, only enough to notice and doubt one's own senses, but it was their presence that lingered. They carried calm that seemed contagious. People around them felt safer, lighter, more centered, as if anxiety itself dissolved in proximity. When asked how they did it, they smiled and said they'd always been that way. Some experiencers claimed deeper encounters. One woman, abducted decades earlier, said she met her grown hybrid son in a cafe in Boston. He looked entirely human, young, tall, his expression serene, but when their eyes met, she felt the same telepathic warmth she'd known aboard the craft years before. He approached her quietly, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said, "We kept the love you gave us." Then he walked away into the crowd. When she tried to follow, he was gone. Psychics and intuitives began reporting an increase in starborn energy, heightened frequencies surrounding certain individuals. They claimed these new humans were vibrational bridges, existing between densities of matter and thought. Scientists dismissed it as poetic mysticism, yet small behavioral studies revealed measurable differences in empathy and neurological response among self-identified experiencers' children. Their brain scans showed elevated activity in regions linked to intuition and social cognition. They literally felt more. When asked what they believed their purpose to be, many answered simply, "To help you remember." Remember what? Researchers would ask. The answers varied: where we came from, what we're meant to become, how to stay alive when the earth begins to change. They speak rarely of the beings themselves now, not because they have forgotten, but because contact has become internal. The voice that once spoke in the dark now murmurs through intuition, through empathy, through a collective stirring. They no longer need ships or machines. They are part of us, whispering through the blood, reawakening the ancient dream of unity written into our DNA. The experiencers who meet them often describe a peculiar emotion afterward, not fear, not confusion, but recognition. The word surfaces again and again in transcripts: familiar, kinship. It felt like home. Perhaps that is the ultimate secret of the hybrid program, that it was never about creating something foreign, but about returning something forgotten, a synthesis of biology and consciousness that reminds humanity of its cosmic inheritance. And if that is true, then they are not the next step of evolution. They are a mirror, showing us what we always were. So the next time a stranger's eyes linger a heartbeat too long, when you feel that odd warmth rising beneath your skin, pause and breathe. It may not be danger. It may be recognition. It may be the quiet whisper of our shared future, already standing beside us, smiling softly, waiting for us to remember. Chapter 6. Biological Cues. Blood has always been humanity's oldest archive. Every drop is a record, not just of ancestry, but of adaptation, migration, survival. It carries within it the signatures of countless generations, each mutation a note in the long song of life. But somewhere in that song, there is a pause, a question mark that science has never resolved, a mystery that whispers of something, or someone, that may have touched the human line. The mystery is called the Rhode factor. Most people have it, a small protein found on the surface of red blood cells. Those who don't are labeled Rhode negative. In modern medicine, it's a simple classification, but in evolutionary biology, it's an anomaly. It appears suddenly in the human record, without transitional origin. No primate ancestor carries it. It is not a mutation that offers survival advantage, nor does it seem to follow standard evolutionary pathways. It simply arrived. Rhode negative individuals make up only a small percentage of the global population, concentrated most heavily in the Basque regions of Spain and France, in certain Middle Eastern tribes, and in isolated lineages scattered through Northern Europe. What's peculiar is not only its rarity, but how it behaves when life tries to reproduce itself. When an ORD negative mother carries an ORD positive child, her immune system can perceive the fetus as foreign. Her body begins producing antibodies, the first recorded instance in nature of a species whose own body rejects its offspring. Without medical intervention, the mother's blood may attack the baby's. It is as though human biology itself remembers a time when two incompatible blueprints attempted to merge. Researchers like David Jacobs, and later independent biologists sympathetic to his work, began to wonder if this incompatibility might be the echo of an older integration, one not of races, but of origins. Could the Rhode negative factor represent an introduced lineage, a marker of genetic blending so ancient that only blood remembers? When scientists mapped the human genome in the early 2000s, they discovered fragments of DNA that did not match any known terrestrial sequence. Some of these orphan genes appeared in all humans, but others existed only in isolated groups, rare silent markers, with no known purpose, no evolutionary story. They were, in the language of genetics, non-coding relics. To researchers of the hybrid hypothesis, they were something else: signatures. Blood samples taken from alleged abductees sometimes revealed anomalies, trace elements out of normal range, rare blood types repeating across unrelated subjects, iron levels inexplicably stable, despite chronic stress or anemia. Doctors found elevated magnesium and copper ratios, patterns too consistent to ignore, yet too subtle to prove. And again, the most common denominator among them, a higher than average rate of Rhode negativity. Some of these individuals displayed physiological peculiarities that seemed almost mythic: resistance to certain viral infections, faster clotting and wound healing, slightly lower average body temperature, enhanced night vision, and in many cases, an unusual sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, headaches under high voltage lines, tingling near electronics, or the ability to sense when storms were approaching before instruments detected change. Mainstream science regards these claims cautiously. Correlation is not causation, an anecdote is not data. But quietly, in laboratories, where genetics meets anthropology, a few researchers began asking uncomfortable questions. Why did the Rhode negative trait appear so suddenly, without evolutionary precedent? Why does it cluster geographically, in regions associated with some of humanity's oldest myths? The Basque legends of sky-born teachers, the Sumerian tales of gods descending to shape humankind, the stories of luminous visitors from the stars who mingled with the daughters of men. The parallels were too ancient to ignore, and when combined with modern abduction testimonies, the implication grew clearer. The genetic conversation between Earth and elsewhere might not have begun in the 20th century. It might have been going on for tens of thousands of years. Dr. John Mack once wrote that contact might not be coming to us, because it had always been within us, encoded in our very blood. A lineage quietly carried forward, hidden behind ordinary ancestry tests, awaiting the moment when consciousness itself would be ready to recognize the pattern. If this is true, then Rh-negative blood is not an anomaly, it is a memory, a whisper of genetic blending so ancient that even our immune systems still remember the moment when human met something not quite human, a biological scar, or perhaps a birthmark. And as new hybrid generations emerge, the same anomaly appears again and again, mothers and children, separated by continents, sharing that same strange silent trait, a quiet fingerprint that seems to trace back, not to the cradle of civilization, but to the stars themselves. So perhaps, when you cut your finger and see that familiar red, you are looking at more than oxygen and iron. You are watching the cosmos remembering itself through you, because in the end, blood is not just proof of life, it is proof of connection to our ancestors, to our children, and maybe to something far older than Earth itself. There are kinds of evidence that do not fit inside test tubes. They do not live in microscopes or blood charts, but in the invisible space between one thought and another, in the sudden knowing, the quiet voice, the intuition that speaks before reason does. For decades, researchers noticed that abductees and their descendants shared a peculiar set of traits. They were not physical in the traditional sense. They were perceptual, a heightened awareness that seemed to reach beyond the five senses. Some called it psychic residue, others, genetic sensitivity. Whatever name it wore, it behaved like a signal, a frequency, a subtle inheritance carried in silence. In interviews conducted through the 1990s and early 2000s, many experiencers described the same sensations. They would think of someone moments before that person called. They would sense a presence entering a room before any sound or motion confirmed it. They would dream of disasters or deaths days before they happened, waking with the ache of déjà vu heavy in their chest. To the uninitiated, these were coincidences. To those within the phenomenon, they were communication, the afterglow of contact, as though the hybrid program had not only altered biology, but expanded the boundaries of consciousness itself. Dr. John Mack referred to this as the psychic aperture. He believed these experiences represented an enlargement of perception, a nervous system tuned to frequencies most humans had forgotten how to hear. In simple terms, these individuals were sensitive to thought the way others are to sound. Abductees often reported that during their encounters, communication with the beings occurred telepathically. The words were not heard but understood. Meaning arrived whole, without grammar, like emotion translated into awareness. Afterward, many retained fragments of that ability. They found themselves finishing people's sentences, answering questions before they were asked, feeling waves of emotion from strangers passing nearby. One woman from Arizona described a moment during meditation when her husband, in another city, thought of calling her. Before his phone even rang, she had already answered. When they checked their clocks later, both confirmed that she had lifted the receiver a full second before his call connected. She said softly, "It felt like the space between us wasn't space anymore." In families where multiple generations had experienced contact, these sensitivities seemed to intensify. Children were especially prone to what researchers called empathic bleed-through, an ability to feel the moods of people, and even animals with overwhelming clarity. One boy told his mother he could feel when the neighbor's dog was sad. Another said he could taste when someone nearby was angry, a metallic bitterness that filled his mouth. Teachers noticed that these children avoided conflict instinctively. They seemed allergic to aggression, often taking the role of quiet mediators in class disputes. Laboratory studies, though small and controversial, showed measurable differences. Some experiencers displayed higher alpha-wave coherence in EEG tests, brain rhythms associated with meditation, intuition, and deep focus. Others registered subtle electromagnetic fluctuations around their bodies, as if their nervous systems emitted a field slightly stronger than baseline human norms. Not proof, perhaps, but suggestion. What intrigued researchers most was how these sensitivities clustered in families. It was not random, it followed the blood, as though whatever had been introduced into the human genome carried both biological and neurological modifications, a design not just to change what humans are, but what they perceive. The experiencers themselves rarely treated it as gift or burden. To them, it was normal. Many spoke of it as remembering. A woman in France said, "We are evolving back into what we were." When asked what she meant, she smiled. "We used to speak with our minds before we had tongues." There is a curious harmony between that idea and ancient myth. In Sumerian and Aboriginal cosmologies, the first beings communicated through light, sound, and emotion. Language came later, a crutch for a species that had forgotten unity. Perhaps then, these psychic awakenings are not new powers, but ancient senses reopening. A kind of cosmic nostalgia playing out through our DNA. Dr. Mack once wrote, "The next stage of human evolution may not be physical, but perceptual, the expansion of empathy into telepathy, of memory into communion." If that is so, the hybrid children are not simply different by design, they are ambassadors of awareness, beings who can hear thought, feel truth, and bridge the silence between species through understanding alone. And if we too are slowly awakening to that frequency, perhaps that was the purpose all along, to teach us to listen to what has always been speaking, not from the stars, but from the quiet center of our own minds. Because maybe the real evidence of alien contact is not written in the blood at all, but in the voice that whispers softly beneath our thoughts, reminding us that separation was never real. For all the speculation about bloodlines and psychic inheritance, there are still those who ask if the hybrids walk among us. Shouldn't we see them? If their presence is real, shouldn't it be visible in bone and skin, in the subtle geometry of the face? Perhaps it is, if one knows where to look. Witnesses who claim to have met them often describe a strange familiarity that arrives before detail. They do not notice what is different first. They notice what feels too perfect. Symmetry so exact it becomes uncanny. Skin smooth but not youthful. Eyes that seem to hold light rather than reflect it, as if stars burn faintly behind the iris, and a quality of stillness that radiates from the body, like breath slowed to the rhythm of the earth itself. Photographs never seem to capture it. To the camera, they look like anyone else. But in person, the air around them hums faintly. People standing near them report warmth, dizziness, calm, a physiological response, the way one might feel near a magnetic field. Some of these individuals show measurable anomalies. Doctors have noted unusually rapid healing after injury, small cuts that close within hours, bruises that vanish overnight. Their resting heart rates are lower than average, their body temperature slightly cooler. Scans reveal unusually high oxygen absorption and greater red blood cell efficiency, almost as if their bodies were tuned for environments with thinner air. These are not myths, they are data points, scattered but persistent, unclaimed by conventional science. There are also subtler signs, details one might overlook in passing. Eyes that change hue under certain lighting, shifting from gray to blue to a mirrored silver, a faint luminescence beneath the skin, visible only under ultraviolet light. A voice cadence measured, musical, precise, devoid of filler words or nervous laughter. They rarely blink. They rarely fidget. They simply observe. Geneticists who have tested self-identified hybrids, though often unofficially, sometimes encounter what they call non-conforming base pairs. Small sequences of DNA that do not match reference genomes, present but inactive, like dormant software in the code of life. Most scientists dismiss them as harmless transcription errors, but to those who study the hybrid hypothesis, these fragments are the signature of design, a biological technology waiting for activation. Some experiencers describe physical sensations when near these individuals, a vibration in the spine, warmth in the palms, or a feeling of pressure in the head, as if air thickens around thought. Others feel emotion before words, joy, peace, or sometimes overwhelming sadness that isn't their own. It's as though communication has migrated from voice to resonance. In Jacob's later research, witnesses who encountered adult hybrids often said the same thing. They were trying to blend in. They wore ordinary clothes, carried identification, even worked simple jobs, but their movements were slightly too deliberate, their smiles perfectly timed, their expressions learned rather than lived. When they made eye contact, it was like being read, completely, without judgment, but without privacy. There is also the phenomenon of recognition. A hybrid passes someone on the street, pauses, and both turn instinctively, a flash of awareness, a silent exchange. Neither speaks, but each feels a pulse, a shimmer of memory. It lasts a second, maybe two, then the moment breaks, and life continues, but the feeling lingers for hours. Warmth, belonging, an ache that feels like remembering home. In families where multiple generations claim abduction, these features seem to concentrate. Children born decades apart share identical eye color, unusual immunity, faster learning. Some display synesthesia, hearing color, tasting emotion. Neurologists note higher density in brain regions linked to sensory integration, but no pathology, just difference. And perhaps most telling of all, they age differently, not slower exactly, but more gracefully. Their skin resists time, their movements stay fluid, balanced. At 40, they appear 30. At 60, barely 50. Their cellular regeneration rates defy ordinary aging curves. When questioned, they shrug. They say they eat little, sleep deeply, and dream often. If these traits are truly signs of hybrid lineage, then the integration Jacobs predicted may already be complete. They are not hidden in secret bases or behind interdimensional veils. They are the teacher with the calmest voice, the nurse whose touch feels impossibly warm, the stranger whose gaze feels like gravity. When the witness looks back, wondering if they imagined it, a thought sometimes surfaces, faint, almost not their own. You recognized me because we are the same. It is easy to dismiss such moments as coincidence, but if the hybrid project is not invasion, not experimentation, but continuation, then perhaps the evidence is not meant to be conclusive. Perhaps it is meant to be intimate, to reveal itself one encounter at a time, until disbelief dissolves into memory. And maybe, just maybe, that is how evolution hides, not in new species born overnight, but in subtle adjustments of light within the eyes of people who were here all along. Chapter 7. Symbol or Science. Every mystery that touches the edges of belief eventually turns its gaze inward. After decades of reports, studies, and testimonies, one question began to echo through both science and philosophy alike. What if the hybrid story is not only about biology, but about the human psyche itself? The abduction phenomenon may be real, physical, measurable, or it may be something far more intricate, a mirror the mind holds up to itself, reflecting the longing for transformation that has always haunted our species. Psychologists exploring the experience through this lens often begin with Carl Jung. In the mid-20th century, Jung wrote of UFOs as modern myths of things seen in the sky, not dismissing them as delusion, but framing them as archetypal symbols, manifestations of the collective unconscious, at a time when humanity was losing its spiritual center. The circular craft, he said, was the perfect symbol of wholeness, a mandala appearing in the heavens, reminding us of unity. Perhaps then, the hybrid child is not a literal creation, but a psychic one, the image of what happens when human consciousness attempts to heal its split between matter and spirit. Across cultures, the same motif repeats: the divine child, the miracle born of heaven and earth, carrying the potential of renewal. From ancient Egyptian texts describing Horus as the offspring of the god Osiris and mortal Isis, to the Christian image of Immaculate Conception, to Buddhist prophecy of the next enlightened one born among humans, each story whispers of union between the seen and unseen. the mortal and the divine. The alien hybrid, stripped of theology, may be the modern retelling of that ancient yearning, a new myth for an age ruled by technology, where gods have given way to scientists, and creation happens not in temples, but in laboratories of light. In Jungian terms, the otherworldly being embodies the self, the totality of consciousness and unconsciousness, striving for balance. To be taken by luminous beings is to be drawn into the depths of one's own evolution, to confront the parts of ourselves we deny, the hidden intelligence that waits beneath the surface of fear. The examination room becomes the symbolic womb, the instruments of extraction become metaphors for psychological probing, and the hybrids, part human, part other, become the living synthesis of opposites. In this light, the hybrid child is not an alien experiment, it is an inner transformation given form. The experiencer is the dreamer birthing awareness, a participant in humanity's collective attempt to integrate what has long been split apart, reason and intuition, intellect and mystery, science and soul. Many who undergo these encounters describe feeling split open, as if reality itself has been dissected and remade around them. And yet the aftermath often brings not insanity, but renewal, a deeper empathy for others, a sense of connection to all living things, a newfound reverence for life in every form. This emotional arc mirrors the process of initiation found in spiritual traditions worldwide. The descent into darkness, the encounter with the unknown, the return to light, transformed. Dr. John Mack's work often circled this truth. He wrote that the abduction experience may be a drama of awakening, where humanity faced with ecological crisis and spiritual amnesia, creates the image of a higher intelligence to guide its own rebirth. In his view, these beings, whether real or symbolic, serve as messengers from the unconscious collective, urging humanity to transcend the boundaries of its ego-driven civilization. To those who experienced abduction firsthand, this perspective offers solace without dismissal. It allows the experience to remain sacred, even if it exists entirely within mind. Because myth, after all, is not falsehood, it is meaning wearing the clothes of imagination. And sometimes, what is imagined becomes real, simply through the power of belief shared across billions of dreaming minds. So perhaps in this psychological frame, the hybrids are not proof of alien intrusion, but evidence of evolution through imagination, the psyche's attempt to grow wings within the confines of its own DNA. A whisper from our deepest depths saying, "Become more, remember what you were meant to be." When seen this way, every abduction becomes a personal revelation, a modern initiation echoing the oldest story ever told, that the divine still visits humanity, not from heaven or from stars, but from within. And if the gods of the past once descended as light, perhaps now they arrive as reflection, appearing in our skies only, so we might learn to look inward. Because maybe the true hybrid is not born of human and alien, but of consciousness and wonder. The psychological view offers comfort, yes, but it does not erase the tangible. For every metaphor, there remains a molecule. For every dream, a trace of data that refuses to vanish. And for many researchers who have dedicated their lives to the mystery, the literal interpretation cannot be dismissed so easily. If these experiences are symbolic, then why do they leave behind marks that heal like surgical scars? Why do independent witnesses see the same craft, the same procedures, the same patterns of missing time? Why do medical scans reveal implants, magnetic anomalies, unexplained pregnancies that appear and disappear? The evidence, though fragmented, carries a weight that imagination alone struggles to bear. In this literal frame, the hybrid program is neither myth nor allegory. It is biology, guided by a technology far beyond our own. It is the continuation of a project begun long before recorded history, one that may have sculpted our species from the start. Consider the concept of directed panspermia, first proposed by Nobel laureate Francis Crick. He theorized that life on Earth could have been seeded intentionally by an advanced civilization, microbes or genetic material, sent through the cosmos like spores of creation. If that is true, then the genetic tinkering seen in abduction reports might not be new intervention, but maintenance, and ancient gardeners return to their own experiment. Throughout the 20th century, genetic research accelerated at an almost unnatural pace. Within a single human lifetime, we went from discovering the double helix to editing genes through CRISPR. Such leaps raise an eerie question. Were we helped? Were the same visitors who took samples in the 1950s quietly guiding the evolution of our understanding? Researchers like Budd Hopkins and David Jacobs noted that abductees often described instruments capable of manipulating DNA through light. One woman recalled a glowing wand hovering above her abdomen, emitting pulses that rearranged tissue without incision. Decades later, scientists would pioneer optical tweezers and gene-editing lasers, technology eerily similar in concept. Coincidence, or blueprint? Jacobs' records describe the hybridization process in stages of increasing precision. Early hybrids appeared fragile, unstable, requiring constant care. Later generations were more human-like, their genetic ratios balanced. By the 1990s, witnesses were describing beings indistinguishable from us, capable of emotion, speech, and social behavior. This mirrored our own progress in cloning, stem cell manipulation, and synthetic DNA. Two parallel experiments, separated by species, converging toward the same goal: life redesigned. There are physical artifacts as well, implants removed under clinical supervision, composed of alloys unknown to conventional metallurgy. Tiny crystalline lattices that emit low-frequency signals until exposed to air, then disintegrate. Biopsies from abductees revealing nanoscopic fibers of organic silicon intertwined with nerve endings. Material science has yet to replicate these phenomena. Skeptics argue contamination, but even they admit the precision exceeds known human engineering of the period. Then there are the biological footprints. A disproportionate number of experiencers possess anomalies in blood chemistry, neural mapping, and immune response. Some display enhanced resistance to radiation or infection, others recover from surgery with unnatural speed. Doctors record it, puzzled, and move on, but in aggregate, the pattern glows faintly, like constellations viewed from orbit. And perhaps most telling, the persistence of multi-generational lineage. Families reporting encounters over decades, grandchildren repeating the same phrases their grandparents once whispered under hypnosis. Words like "the program continues," or "we are the bridge." If mass hallucination, why the inheritance? If fantasy, why the biology? Some military whistleblowers have hinted that governments have known this far longer than the public suspects. Leaked documents, unverified but compelling, speak of recovery operations focused not on crashed craft, but on biological specimens, hybridized bodies preserved in cryogenic containment. Their tissue, one report claimed, carried both human mitochondrial DNA and sequences never catalogued on Earth. Officially, such documents don't exist. Unofficially, their echoes do. Even conservative scientists admit the possibility of parallel evolution, or intervention events, in our distant past. Mitochondrial studies show sudden leaps in cognitive ability around 200,000 years ago, coinciding with the birth of Homo sapiens. Archaeological strata show tool sophistication appearing almost overnight. Culture, art, language, all erupted at once. To believers, this was not coincidence, but activation, the spark of hybrid intelligence igniting in the human brain. If so, then the abductions of the modern era are not alien intrusion at all, they are continuity. The next iteration of a process that began when starlight first mingled with our DNA. It is tempting to separate symbol from science, mind from matter. But what if they are the same experiment viewed from two sides, the psyche dreaming of transformation, the genome quietly performing it? If the hybrid program is real, it is not invasion, it is inheritance. It is the custodians of our origin tending the seeds they once planted, guiding a species too young to remember its ancestry, yet old enough now to suspect the truth. And maybe that is why they remain silent, why their crafts vanish, why their motives remain veiled. Because the experiment is still ongoing, and the subjects are beginning to awaken. Perhaps the truth has never been on one side or the other. Perhaps it has always lived between, where symbol meets substance, and belief folds into biology. For decades, two worlds have argued over the mystery of the hybrids. Science demands proof, samples, scans, evidence that can be weighed and measured. Psychology speaks of archetypes and trauma, of the mind inventing symbols to heal itself. But what if both are right? What if this phenomenon is two realities overlapping, each one interpreting the same event through its own language? Imagine two instruments tuned to different octaves, but playing the same note. To one, the sound is frequency. To the other, emotion. Both are true, but neither is complete. In that harmony, the abduction phenomenon takes on a new shape. The ships, the procedures, the luminous beings, the hybrid children. They may be both material and metaphor, vessels that travel not only through space, but through consciousness. The experiencers themselves seem to live in this middle ground. Many describe the physical sensations, cold metal, bright light, pressure on the chest, and yet when they recount it later, their voices soften, as if recalling a dream too sacred for literal words. They describe seeing with more than eyes, hearing through thought, traveling without movement, physics and spirit coexisting in the same breath. Dr. John Mack once wrote that human experience cannot be divided neatly between inner and outer worlds, that contact experiences seem to unfold in a third domain of reality, one that is both psychological and physical, subjective and objective. It is a realm our culture has forgotten how to speak about, where myth was once fact and symbol was once science. Across time we see this middle path reflected in stories that defy categorization. The angels of ancient scripture descending in radiant chariots, the luminous beings of the Vedas guiding early kings, the shamanic encounters with star ancestors who carried messages through light. Were they gods, visitors, or consciousness itself revealing its own reflection? Each era interprets through its own tools. The ancients saw divinity, the modern mind sees technology, but the experience remains the same, humanity meeting the beyond. Even the language of the witnesses bridges this divide. They speak of rooms of light and instruments that hum with emotion, of beings who feel neither robotic nor spiritual, but something in between. Technicians of consciousness, scientists of soul. Their procedures appear medical, yet their intentions feel metaphysical, as if they are not studying the body, but awakening it. Jacobs and Hopkins abductees told of being shown hybrid children and feeling a love beyond comprehension. Mack's subjects described the same moment as enlightenment, the realization that these beings were not others, but mirrors of the next stage of ourselves. In their arms, the hybrid infant becomes both literal and symbolic, a fusion of genetic material and the universal longing for unity. Even physics in its deepest corridors whispers of this overlap. Quantum theory blurs the distinction between observer and observed, between mind and matter. Particles appear only when watched. Reality behaves as though consciousness is woven into its foundation. If that is so, then perhaps the abduction phenomenon is consciousness expressing itself through biology, an encounter that materializes because we are ready to perceive it. To walk the middle path is to release the need for one explanation. To accept that mystery may not be contradiction, but collaboration. Science gives the skeleton, symbolism gives it breath. Together they build a truth more human than either alone. In this space, there is no conflict between test tube and temple, between laboratory and dream. Both seek the same answer: what are we becoming? And maybe the hybrids, whether children of flesh or metaphor, are simply the shape that answer takes when humanity looks at its reflection in the stars. The real question then is not whether they exist, it is why we are being shown them now. Why this century, this moment, this awakening? Perhaps it is because the earth itself is changing, its magnetic field shifting, its ecosystems in flux, its people restless and yearning. and as the planet evolves, so too must the species that calls it home. Whether guided by visitors or visions, we are being nudged toward integration, toward remembering that we were never separate from the cosmos, only asleep within it. So maybe the hybrids are not coming to us at all. Maybe they are emerging from within us, manifestations of a species remembering that it is both matter and mind, both dust and divinity. The middle path is not compromise, it is wholeness, and perhaps in that wholeness lies the final truth of the phenomenon, that the universe and consciousness are the same field dreaming itself into form. Chapter 8. The Future Genome. What if the story is already finished? Not something we are waiting to happen, but something that happened long ago. For generations, we have looked upward for signs of contact, but perhaps we should have been looking inward all along. Because if the patterns are true, the genetic markers, the sudden leaps in intelligence, the inexplicable appearance of the Roch negative line, then humanity's integration with the unknown may not be an event of the future, but the foundation of our past. Ancient texts seem to echo this possibility in language that only now reveals its hidden meanings. The Sumerians, among the earliest civilizations, spoke of the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens and fashioned mankind from clay. Archaeologists once called it metaphor, but the word translated as clay can also mean essence, blood, or gene. The story might not describe sculpture, but synthesis. The Dogon of West Africa tell of the Namo, amphibious beings who came from the star Sirius, teaching humanity about the structure of the cosmos long before telescopes were born. In Aboriginal Australian lore, the Wandjina, sky beings painted with pale faces and dark unblinking eyes, descended in a time of creation, bringing laws, art, and life itself. Across continents, cultures that never met spoke of the same thing. Teachers from the stars who mingled with early humans, altering not just our knowledge, but our very nature. To the ancients, they were gods. To us, they might be genetic engineers. And perhaps the hybrid program of the modern era is not new intervention, but maintenance of an ancient covenant, a renewal of the partnership that began when we first opened our eyes and saw the stars as kin. When anthropologists study the rise of Homo sapiens, they find abrupt transitions that defy evolutionary logic. Brain volume expanded almost overnight. Symbolic art appeared across caves in Europe and Africa, showing complex abstract thought where none had existed before. The leap from hunter to philosopher happened with suspicious speed, as if something had ignited the neural network from within. If evolution is a ladder, someone seems to have added a rung. The integration, then, may already be complete. Our myths were the memory of their arrival, our religions were the emotional echo of their influence, and our science, the slow rediscovery of what they once knew. Even our DNA bears strange signatures, insertions that do not follow the patterns of mutation, orphan genes that appear out of nowhere, segments that seem designed rather than evolved. When geneticists map the tree of life, humanity's branch glows with irregular light. It fits, but only just, like a graft, like something joined carefully to something older. If this is true, then we are not merely children of Earth. We are descendants of an ancient integration, the outcome of cosmic experiment. We are, quite literally, the hybrid children. Perhaps that is why we dream of the stars. Perhaps that longing isn't curiosity, it's memory. Something in our blood remembers where it came from. When we stare into the night sky and feel both awe and homesickness, maybe it is not poetry, but instinct. The cell remembering the source of its own spark. And maybe the reason the visitors return is not observation, but reunion. They are not testing us, they are checking on us, guiding our maturation, as a parent watches a child learn to walk on its own. When they take samples, when they teach through dreams, they are not harvesting, they are calibrating, ensuring that the line they began continues to thrive, not just in body, but in consciousness. This possibility turns fear into wonder. It means we are not at the center of the universe, but part of its living architecture, a bridge between worlds that once seemed divided. It also explains why, when experiencers describe their encounters, there is so often recognition. They are not meeting strangers, they are meeting family. Somewhere in the vast history of creation, we were joined, shaped, and set free. And now, as we approach a new century of evolution, they return not to create us, but to remind us of what we already are. The integration, it seems, was never about the blending of species. It was about awakening the memory that the blending has already happened, that the human story is not a solitary ascent from dust, but a symphony written in collaboration, earth and sky, matter and intelligence, co-authoring the miracle we call life. So tonight, if you feel that quiet pulse under your skin, that subtle hum that seems to echo from the stars, don't dismiss it as imagination. It may be the oldest part of you remembering itself, because the integration isn't coming, it is complete. It always has been. If the integration is already complete, then what remains is not creation, but activation. A quiet awakening that unfolds inside each of us, cell by cell, generation by generation, as if the human genome has been waiting for a cosmic signal to remember itself. Some scientists call it epigenetic awakening, the process by which dormant genes, silent for millennia, begin to express under new conditions. Radiation, frequency, emotion, even consciousness itself can act as triggers. What if the hybrid story is simply nature's next breath? What if our DNA, part Earth and part elsewhere, is preparing to adapt to the coming age, an age when both the planet and the mind will change together? The Earth is shifting. Magnetic fields wander, climates tilt, oceans warm, and the poles begin their slow dance. We sense it not only in weather, but in mood, a global tension, as if the planet itself is whispering for balance. And in the midst of that whisper, new generations are being born different, not visibly, not dramatically, but quietly, neurologically, emotionally, empathically. Children more sensitive, more intuitive, less bound by the linear. They feel the heartbeat of the world and mistake it for their own. Perhaps this is the next step of the same experiment, a species learning to evolve consciously. For the first time, evolution is not random mutation, but intentional awakening, guided not by environment, but by awareness. The genome itself responding to the vibration of thought, to the music of realization echoing across the species. Ancient traditions spoke of this moment in poetic language. The Hopi called it the Great Turning, when the children of the stars and the children of earth would remember their kinship. The Maya wrote of cycles of renewal, when the calendar would close like a circle, and light would return to activate the seed of the gods within mankind. Even modern physics, in its most daring interpretations, whispers of quantum consciousness, a field linking all living things, where thought is not separate from matter, and DNA may act as both antenna and memory. The hybrid narrative, seen through this lens, becomes prophecy written in biology. The beings who once taught us from the stars may have encoded a message not in stone or scripture, but in the architecture of our own cells, a biological program that activates when the species is ready. And what could prepare humanity more than crisis? Change is always born from pressure, and Earth now hums with it. From ecological upheaval to technological acceleration, we are being sculpted by our own creations. Same artificial intelligence we fear may soon merge with our organic minds, the same fusion that the hybrid program explored in flesh. What they began in laboratories of light, we are repeating in silicon and circuit, different tools, same trajectory. Some experiencers claim they've been told this directly. In hypnotic regressions and waking visions, the beings spoke of an impending shift, not apocalypse, but adaptation. They said humanity was entering an era of frequency, where survival would depend not on strength or wealth, but on resonance, the ability to hold peace in chaos, to harmonize emotion with the Earth's changing pulse. Those who could, would thrive. Those who couldn't, would fade like static. Perhaps this explains the hybrid children's strange serenity, why they move through life, as if anchored to some deeper rhythm. They are already adapted to that future environment, to a world vibrating faster than our present minds can manage. Their nervous systems tuned not for fear, but coherence. Science might one day call it genetic resonance. Mystics already call it ascension. Different words for the same unfolding a planetary evolution that is not coming from the outside, but rising from within. And so the preparation may not be a plan imposed by distant entities, but an agreement we made before remembering what it meant. The universe expanding through us, the genome becoming self-aware, the child of Earth, realizing it has always been the child of stars. As this transformation accelerates, new faculties will awaken, intuition deepening into telepathy, emotion translating directly into energy, healing occurring through intention. Already, the boundaries of what is possible begin to blur, the placebo effect healing without medicine, quantum entanglement defying distance, consciousness influencing machines through thought alone. Science calls these anomalies. Perhaps they are simply glimpses of tomorrow. If this is the preparation, then the future genome is not waiting to be built. It is awakening right now, inside each quiet heartbeat, every act of empathy, every moment of awe, every breath taken in peace rewires the species ever so slightly. The signal spreads through generations, through dream, through song, through the soft vibration of kindness. This is how evolution moves when it becomes aware of itself, not through competition, but through connection. And maybe that is what the beings have been waiting for all along, the moment when humanity no longer needs to be guided from above, because the stars have begun to speak from within. They are already here. They don't arrive in ships, or descend in beams of light. They arrive the way all new life does, quietly through the most human act imaginable. In hospitals and homes around the world, children are being born who seem just slightly different, not in ways a doctor can chart, but in the subtleties that language can barely hold. Eyes that open too soon after birth, as if startled not by light, but by memory. Infants who hold the gaze of their parents with disarming calm, as though recognizing them from a much older story. Teachers notice it in classrooms. These children learn faster, but not in linear ways. They think in patterns, not steps. They absorb languages like melody. They can sense moods the way others sense temperature, and they speak of things that sound like dreams, yet carry the ring of knowing. One teacher in Argentina recalled a boy who drew a perfect spiral galaxy on the board and said, "This is where my first family lives. They don't need mouths to talk." When asked who told him that, he answered simply, "No one had to. I remember." In Japan, a girl of 7 explained to her parents that people used to live in 2 bodies at once, one on Earth, one in the stars. A doctor in Norway reported that several newborns in her care seemed hypersensitive to sound frequencies beyond adult hearing ranges. They turned their heads not toward voices, but toward vibrations. Across continents, these small anomalies accumulate like grains of sand forming a new shore. They are the children of tomorrow, the first generation fully awake within the merged genome of earth and sky. Psychiatrists sometimes label them highly sensitive or neurodivergent. Spiritualists call them starseeds. Researchers in parapsychology study their unusual empathy, their ability to synchronize heartbeats during meditation, their inexplicable bursts of knowledge about science, art, or the cosmos far beyond their years. But perhaps these are not anomalies. Perhaps they are adaptations. Signs that the human template is evolving again, becoming more fluid, more connected, more aware of the network that unites all consciousness. In a small case series published quietly in 2018, neurologists measuring electromagnetic output in young meditation subjects found something remarkable: brief coherence patterns, waves in perfect synchrony across different brains, as if minds could entrain one another without words. To scientists, it was an anomaly. To mystics, it was confirmation. Collective consciousness made measurable. If these children truly carry hybrid lineage, It reveals itself not through alien features but through unity of perception. They are the first to live comfortably in paradox, to know that science and spirit, dream and waking life, are not opposing realities, but layers of the same field. Their eyes reflect that awareness, depth without judgment, curiosity without fear. They sense technology as extension, not enemy. They adapt easily to artificial intelligence, virtual worlds, and shifting frequencies of communication because they see no division between natural and synthetic. To them, creation is creation. One researcher asked a 9-year-old girl why she liked staring at the stars every night. She said, "Because they look like memories waiting to be remembered." When asked what she thought aliens were, she smiled, "They're just us before we forgot." If evolution truly follows intention now, then these children are the carriers of that intention. They are empathy incarnate, living bridges, designed not for conquest, but for coherence. Through them, conflict feels heavier, cooperation feels natural, violence seems ancient, belonging to an earlier species. When they look at war, they see illness. When they see suffering, they reach, not out of pity, but instinct. They are the reason many experiencers no longer speak of abduction, but of contact. Because in the presence of these children, the divide between visitor and visited dissolves. The experiment has moved beyond laboratories of light and into playgrounds of earth. Perhaps that was always the goal, to seed within humanity a generation capable of carrying two frequencies at once, one anchored to soil, the other tuned to starlight, to teach us, gently, that the universe is not somewhere else, but here, breathing through our evolution. If you pass one of these children in the world, the quiet boy who seems to notice every emotion in a room, the girl who draws stars and calls them her family, you might feel it, the pulse, the stillness, the echo of recognition. They are not waiting to arrive. They are waiting for us to remember. The future is not coming from the sky. It is already walking beside us. Small hands, reaching upward, eyes reflecting constellations that have never stopped watching, and when they finally speak the words we have forgotten, it will not sound like revelation. It will sound like home. You have traveled far tonight, through stories of light and shadow, through whispers of blood and memory, through the long, slow unfolding of what it means to be human. Now let the journey fade. Let each thought drift away like a paper lantern released into the dark. You do not need to understand what you have heard. You only need to rest in the wonder of it. Every breath you take is part of a greater rhythm, a rhythm older than this planet, older than the stars that birthed it. The same energy that pulsed through the first cell still moves through you now, unbroken, eternal, curious. Listen, can you hear it? That soft hum beneath your heartbeat, that whisper that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. That is the song of your lineage, the quiet choir of ancestors, human and beyond, singing the story of your becoming. The mystery is not out there in the cold distance of space. It has never been far away. It breathes with you. It dreams with you. It opens its eyes each morning through yours. Let the body settle. Feel the weight of gravity holding you, the fabric of the bed beneath, the air touching your skin like water. You are home now, in the most literal sense. You are resting inside the earth's embrace, a child of its dust and its stars. Above you, the constellations wheel slowly, patient and precise. They have been watching for billions of years, but tonight they seem closer, not distant suns, but cells in a body so vast it could only be called cosmos. You are part of that body. You always have been. Close your eyes and imagine the DNA within you, those twin spirals of light spinning gently. They shimmer as you breathe, responding to every calm heartbeat. They are listening too. They remember everything. The first ocean, the first wind, the first time awareness looked up and wondered, "Who am I?" That question has carried across centuries, and perhaps across galaxies. It is the same question the visitors asked when they looked at us. It is the same question we ask when we look at them. In the silence between those questions lies the answer. We are one story told in many voices. Let that thought cradle you now. Let it replace worry. Let it replace the idea of separation. Because you were never alone, not for a single breath. Somewhere, out beyond the clouds, a craft hums quietly in the dark, its lights pulsing like a slow heartbeat in the sky. Somewhere else, in a cradle of soft blue glow, a child that is not entirely human sleeps, dreaming of the world you know, the scent of rain, the warmth of sun on skin, the sound of a mother's voice whispering a song that crosses worlds. And as you drift toward sleep, you and that child are connected, two halves of the same melody, sung across light years and lifetimes. Breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, each breath a bridge, each exhale a letting go. The hybrid children are not far away. They are here, woven through the generations, their hearts beating quietly beside ours. They walk the same streets, see the same sunrise, feel the same ache to understand. And in their calm, in their patience, they carry a message meant for nights like this. Sleep now. The work of remembering continues while you dream. So let your muscles soften. Let your thoughts dissolve into sound. You are safe. You are loved. You are part of something unimaginably vast and gentle. The stars have always been your family, and tonight they keep their watch. Their light, millions of years old, touches your skin through the open window. A slow, steady blessing. It says, you belong, you always have. In that belonging there is peace. In that peace, the body begins to heal. Cells repair themselves, breath deepens, the heartbeat slows to match the rhythm of the planet turning beneath you. You are synchronized now, mind, body, world and sky. And when morning comes, you will wake lighter. Not because the questions are gone, but because you have learned to hold them gently, the way a mother holds a sleeping child, without needing to wake it. The universe is not asking for belief, it is offering connection. The choice was never between truth and illusion, but between fear and curiosity. You have chosen curiosity, that is evolution. Let the thought fade, let silence return. Stars glimmer beyond your closed eyelids, each one a pulse in the endless body of being. The night breathes with you. Somewhere far from here, the children of tomorrow look up at those same stars and feel the same calm blooming in their chests. They do not know your name, but they know your heart. They feel its signal through the field that joins all life. And if they could speak to you now, they would whisper, rest, traveler of dust and light. You have carried the story far. We will carry it from here. Sleep now, hybrid children of earth and stars. Sleep now, dreamers of the next dawn. Let the night fold around you like ancient wings. Let the hum of the universe cradle you back into memory. And as you drift beyond thought, remember this, you are the continuation of a love older than time, the meeting of cosmos and consciousness, matter and meaning, science and soul. The experiment was never theirs alone, it was always ours. Sleep, and let the universe dream through you.